Okay, time to get some good old-fashioned turn-based JRPG action on the go.
What the hell is that?
Final Fantasy XII was a game that, prior to making this video, I'd slept on for a long time for a whole slew of reasons. But now, having played the remastered Zodiac Age edition on Steam, I can safely say that it is one of the most polarizing experiences I've had playing a Final Fantasy. In fact, there are few games I've played in recent memory where I've been completely engaged one night and swung all the way around to being bored out of my mind and wondering, why the hell am I putting myself through this on another? You know, thinking about it, I've swung from one to the other and back again in a single session. While I got my start in Final Fantasy VII for reasons outlined in this video, shameless plug here, and there's a whole 6 other pixel art entries that came before and set the expectation of what a Final Fantasy game is, even for me, it's kind of easy to just look at what's on offer and say, well, this isn't Final Fantasy. A state of affairs that has become pretty consistent with every entry after the release of X-2. 12 wasn't the first to break the mold of what was expected in a Final Fantasy though. As we'll talk about soon enough, 11 had done that by being an MMORPG rather than a single player game, and prior to its launch, had come under fire from both executives at Square Enix and fans for taking a number versus just being called Final Fantasy Online. What is objectively true though, is that 12 is one of the most interesting and unique entries in the series, and it's unashamedly itself. It knows what it is and isn't scared if you don't like it. Whether or not the game wins you over, it will do so on its terms, and I have a lot of respect for that. For that reason, it's easy to understand why there's so much love for this game, and so many who consider it their favourite in the series. It's such a different experience in the way it delivers its narrative, and the emphasis it places on exploration, and the scale of its world versus big story set pieces, that for many fans of Final Fantasy, or RPGs in general, this could be the game that perfectly scratches their itch. For me though, well, that's complicated. I love all kinds of RPGs for all kinds of reasons, but I specifically play Final Fantasy for those big, convoluted narratives with dramatic character reveals and over-the-top drama, and for that reason, this one really doesn't hit me as hard. It hits me for sure, but from a different angle in a different way, giving me something that I'd generally be going to a different series, or maybe even an entirely different genre for. And while I do like its pseudo-real-time combat and gambit system, I don't think it's good enough to carry the absurd volume of battles that are required of you in this game. The scale of the world is impressive for sure, especially because we're talking about a game that was originally released on the PlayStation 2 and packed onto a DVD. But there's just too much running through areas fighting endless battles, and not enough of everything else I want out of a Final Fantasy. There's also incredibly limited fast travel and saving options, which makes me feel like the game really disrespects my time. So to put it simply, I'm conflicted. Now don't go thinking this is going to be an overly negative review or some kind of hit piece. If I don't like a game, I just don't talk about it, even if it's a numbered entry in a series. I'm one of those make the beautiful things you want to see in the world kind of creators. I have a lot of love for this game and enjoyed a lot of my time with it, but I have issues. Issues that are potentially deal-breaking when it comes to replaying it. And we're going to have to talk about those to get the full picture of my experience with it. So with the preamble out of the way, the general YouTuber requests here and here, and socials all plugged here, here and here, let's start with the big question of, how did we even get here? 2006 marked the end of the 6th and greatest generation of game consoles the world has ever seen and will likely ever see. While the 5th generation had seen many wild experiments exploring what exactly a 3D game was, the 6th was able to build upon the best ideas of those experiments and ramp up the presentation to the perfect sweet spot between realism and stylized. Yes, studios were still getting bigger, and graphics were getting more expensive to make, but we weren't quite at the stage we are now, where budgets and development times have spiraled far beyond reason, and the returns expected from those games are so vast that only the blandest, most styrofoam experiences are being put out by AAA studios, whose reins are held by shareholders with no interest in art. Also, the lack of online connectivity for console games meant there was no day one patches, day one DLC, or live service features that meant you had to keep paying for a game you'd already bought. A game had to be finished, complete, on a disc, on a shelf, in a store, and it had to be good, or no one was going to play it. Simple. But what a send-off that generation got. 2005 and 2006 saw the release of some of the greatest games ever made, spread across all systems. From legendary titles like Shadow of the Colossus and Metal Gear Solid 3 hitting the PlayStation, Fear on the PC, Twilight Princess on the Cube, and some games probably happened on the Xbox maybe? I don't know. Relax, I'm a big Jade Empire and Stranger's Wrath fan, and who could forget objective works of art like Playboy the Mansion? Not me, that's who. I certainly didn't just see that on a Google search and throw it in as a gag. The 360 was already out at this point, and Gears of War had popularized a style of action gameplay that Operation Winback had pioneered on the N64 and the PS2 quite a few years before, and Sony's overpriced, ugly black box that people had been making fun of for months now was set to take the world by... well, it did okay. So, similar to Final Fantasy IX, 12 was a send-off for a generation, a so long and farewell to a console and a generation that had seen Square go through one of its most challenging times before merging with their former rivals and frenemies Enix into something quite new. I can't really tell you if the world was as hyped for Final Fantasy XII as it was for the others because I wasn't exactly plugged into that side of gaming anymore at that time. The Advent Children movie that had released the year before had reinvigorated my interest in JRPGs somewhat, but I had been captured by an entirely different world. And not only had the game absolutely swept me away on a whirlwind adventure, I was getting into the message boards and even the idea of making my own mods, which led me down the road to being something of a 3D artist myself. So yeah, I didn't have a PS2. I was living in a little box in student halls of residence, trying my best to eat the food I bought before the alcoholic on my floor just helped himself to it, or the suppliers of the guy dealing drugs next door came around trying to start something over money. I was just on my PC, and I could just about run the big gaming event of 2006 for me.
I was born 87 years ago. For 65 years I've ruled as Tamriel's emperor. But for all these years, I've never been the ruler of my own dreams.
Since I still worked part-time in a gaming store, I did at least see the launch of the game. But neither myself or anyone in my social circle was talking about it. We all just had our attention elsewhere. And it kind of felt like this wasn't the same game series we'd fallen in love with back on the PS1. That being said, the game sold millions of copies in the first couple of weeks. A large percentage of those being Japan sales, of course. But it shows that there was certainly no lack of hype for this one. The brand was clearly as strong as ever, and this game even continued the trend started with 10-2 of getting a direct sequel, albeit one locked to the Nintendo DS. Final Fantasy XII eventually got a remaster and upgrade with the Zodiac Age on the PlayStation 4. So while I had moved on, there were plenty of people in the world who were still here for it, and the game had high review scores across the board. The Steam release in 2018 meant it was only a matter of time before I'd finally be tucking into this one. And that's kinda how we got here. But how did Final Fantasy get here exactly? To answer that, we should probably talk a little about Final Fantasy XI. Square Pictures was established in Honolulu in 1997, a little before the release of Final Fantasy VII and the subsequent conquest of the entire world that Square undertook in the wake of that. It's most famous for producing a Final Fantasy movie that managed to appeal to neither fans of the game or a mainstream movie-going audience alike. That movie flopping, and the fallout from that leaving Square almost bankrupt until both Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts came along to bail them out. So, you may or may not be aware of this, but Japanese people love Hawaii. It's a vacation spot that's far enough away from Japan to be considered adventurous, has just enough of a different culture to feel exciting, as well as a more comfortable climate, but also really caters towards Japanese tourists, offering them familiar food, safety and comfort, while also having a large Japanese-speaking population to cater to those who don't speak English. So when Hironobu Sakaguchi's company basically set up shop in one of his favorite vacation spots and told him to go and work out there, far enough away from Japan that he wouldn't have to comply with the oppressive work culture over here, well, you can see why he might have jumped on that. This is where he first encountered Western MMORPGs. From what I've read, the post-work bar culture so prevalent in Tokyo wasn't so easy to find in Hawaii, and Sakaguchi got into EverQuest as a way to enjoy his evenings, even roping in his co-workers in Hawaii and Tokyo to game with him. This is how he got the idea that it could be both a creative and profitable venture to maybe do this, but with Final Fantasy. Japan certainly wasn't a stranger to these games, as MMOs like EverQuest and Dark Ages of Camelot had plenty of Japanese players, and Phantasy Star Online, while not exactly a true MMO, had been released on the Dreamcast. I actually played through that whole game solo because I didn't have an internet connection at the time. But I'm glad there are still ways to play it even now. Hit me up if you ever want to play. I'm always down. This was going to be a massive undertaking though, as they not only needed to make the game, but the entire online infrastructure to play it on. In a conversation between former producer Akihiko Matsui and Mr. Yoshi P himself, Naoki Yoshida, we got this little exchange. About how many people were involved in Final Fantasy XI at the time. That would have been anyone that wasn't working on Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy X, which were being developed simultaneously. It was a joint effort between the Parasite Eve 2 and the Brave Fencer Musashi teams from Osaka and the Mana and Chrono Cross teams from Tokyo. With the sheer number of people we had, it almost felt like we were destined to make something great. So, if you're wondering what happened to those franchises, well, blame this man here. Oh, wait, you made Lost Odyssey, didn't you? Well, okay. All is forgiven then. Just, maybe port it to PC sometime soon? While this might seem like Square stepping down a darker path, pivoting to larger projects with higher potential for financial returns over anything else, I don't think we're quite there yet. Certainly, a successful MMO is a massive cash cow, as it's a game you buy and keep paying for via monthly subscriptions. But reading through some of these old interviews and conversations, it's easy to see that the project was born out of Sakaguchi's newfound passion for MMORPGs and the potential of a Final Fantasy that takes place in a shared world with shared experiences. A powerful story was clearly also a critical part of the Final Fantasy formula that they wanted to include. To paraphrase Matsui here, at the time, most MMORPGs required you to spend most of your time leveling up. However, the Final Fantasy XI development team argued that it was precisely because of those reasons that it would be meaningless for us to not create a game without an emphasis on story. Stories are, after all, what make Final Fantasy games so memorable and cherished. I know there is a subset of the fanbase obsessed with equipment optimization and exploiting the systems for speed and challenge runs, and that's hella cool. But most of the stories you hear from people talking about these games are all about the characters they love and the moments in the narratives that had the biggest impact on them. While I've heard some argue that lots of games have stories and worlds to explore, and it's the systems that make an RPG, I'm not especially interested in playing an RPG that isn't going to take me on a wild adventure with crazy characters. Along with the game, Square also developed the Play Online system, which you can kind of envision as something like an early PlayStation Network. It was meant as a platform to host multiple games, as well as libraries of manga, a merch store for various Square products, and a friends list and chat functions. aside from needing to be subscribed to this service to play Final Fantasy XI, it's probably most famous for the Final Fantasy IX Prima strategy guide. Square were trying to push early adoption of the platform hard, and thought that carving out information from a guide that people had handed over hard-earned money for, hosting it on their proprietary online service, and then telling people to go there, create an account, and start paying monthly fees was a good way to achieve this. Actually, maybe this is the beginning of their decline after all. For our purposes though, I think this is one of the most important things to consider about Final Fantasy XI. Mr. Sakaguchi and I did talk about how if we made an MMORPG, it ought to be based on Final Fantasy. Then we were deciding whether to call it Final Fantasy Online or release it as a numbered entry in the series. Mr. Sakaguchi adamantly believed it should be released as a numbered entry. He insisted that a game with a name like Final Fantasy World would be viewed as a spin-off rather than a main entry in the Final Fantasy series, which led to a debate between him and management. Management wanted to revoke its place as a numbered entry later on because they feared many people would be unable to play the game as it required purchasing additional hardware on top of the PlayStation 2 console. So, in response to the question, how did Final Fantasy get here? Well, this is the big answer. Final Fantasy XI could have just been Final Fantasy Online, and we might have got another turn-based Final Fantasy XI instead. But Sakaguchi wanted to innovate. He wanted to push the series forward, and thanks to his newfound love for EverQuest, he really felt that shared online experiences were the future of RPGs. Now you may say, well, what does this have to do with Final Fantasy XII? After all, it's not an MMORPG. True, but after 11 broke the mold, especially in such a monumental way, the door was wide open and the rulebook was thrown out of the window. This has led to a kind of misconception that Square Enix doesn't like turn-based RPGs anymore, despite the fact they put out a lot of them, some of which shamelessly pander to the nostalgia of their pixel art masterpieces. I'm not trying to argue that every new system they've made is good, or that the increase in development cycle lengths, budgets, and returns expected from each new game hasn't led to Square chasing trends and playing safe versus gambling and breaking molds. Just that it's a little more complex and nuanced than the average Reddit, Twitter post, or old man yells at new game Instagram reel would have you believe. I did put quite a few hours into Final Fantasy XI back in the day, and a little part of me would love to do a longer video on it. The problem is, the game is very different now from back when I first played it. And if it wasn't, that would create the problem of not having the time to do it all, or the space on my hard drive to record it. If you want to know a little more about it though, then I recommend my friend Alex's videos on these two games. He was also gracious enough to let me use the VODs of his recent achievement hunting in Vana'diel for the background capture for this video. So maybe go check out his channel or his stream and send him a thank you from me. There are also clearly many design elements of 11 that were used in 12. Everything from the visual style, the large open world divided into sections, to its focus on building up your character and engaging in monster raids, taking up more time than engaging with the primary story. Also, the seed of what would become Final Fantasy XII's combat system can clearly be seen here. I mean, what are these two things if not the same, huh? In an interview with Polygon regarding the upcoming Zodiac Age re-release of the game, producer Hiroaki Kato recounts, "There wasn't specifically an intentional sharing of concepts with Final Fantasy XI, but at the time, a lot of the staff were playing Final Fantasy XI. Being part of the same company, I think it informed our ideas and influenced our decisions in some ways, with Final Fantasy XII having more unique elements necessary to make that work for single player. But there wasn't a conscious sort of exchange there. So while they may not have been looking at each other's homework, they were certainly sharing their ideas about with each other. So the floodgates have now been opened. Why don't we take a look at what happened next?" Final Fantasy X, 11, and 12 were announced at roughly the same time by Hironobu Sakaguchi at the end of the year 2000. With Final Fantasy IX now squared away, pun not intended, but I'll take it, all eyes were cast towards the future, the DVD, and the power of the PlayStation 2. The Kitase Nomura combo that had brought us 8 were now elbows deep in creating the world of Spira, and turning Final Fantasy X into not just a great game, but also something of a tech demo to show off what the PlayStation 2 was really capable of. We've already touched on how Final Fantasy XI became what it became, and with the heavy investment Square had put into Play Online, there was already talk of every subsequent Final Fantasy game being some kind of online experience. Praise the Ikuria that didn't happen. As executive producer Akitoshi Kawazu said in an interview with IGN, 10 was announced as an offline game, while 11 onwards would be online games. Obviously, in the process of developing Final Fantasy XII, that changed. Which implies that, back then at least, Square was still open to yielding to the advice of their creatives rather than relentlessly chasing the money. Since by the time 12 would be in full development, studios would have a solid grasp of the PlayStation 2's capabilities and quirks, Sakaguchi wanted creators who could use all this incredible new power to do something different. Something that would stand out from the pack. To quote Kawazu from another interview at the launch of Final Fantasy XII in France, "The decision came from Mr. Sakaguchi himself when, in 2000, he announced the next Final Fantasy games that would be released in the future. With Final Fantasy XII in this list, Mr. Sakaguchi had decided that it should be different from the others. That's why he decided to entrust it to the team that had been responsible for Vagrant Story." That's right, the very people behind not only Vagrant Story, but also Final Fantasy Tactics, and the creator of the world that all three of these games share, Yasumi Matsuno, was put in charge of the project. Along with this, they also had the creator of both Final Fantasy VIII's Junction system, the inventor of the iconic active time battle system, and Final Fantasy IX director Hiroyuki Ito into the mix. And these guys had a mind to shake things up and put out something truly unique. Checking out the interviews that were shipped with the bonus DVD of the PS2 Collector's Edition of the game, one of the first things Ito wanted to cut was random battles. He wanted to create a system where exploring the world and fighting enemies would happen seamlessly. And this meant not only having enemies populating the map at all times, but also creating an entirely new combat system to see players engage with them. Story-wise, the game was set in Matsuno's very own world of Ivalice. This was the setting for both Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story. And while you don't have to have played either of those games to enjoy this one, there's quite a few DiCaprio moments for players returning here to enjoy. The obvious one this time being the summon monsters, called Espers in this game, aren't our usual collection of mythological creatures like Ifrit and Bahamut, but the demons of the Zodiac from Tactics, with the game's final boss Ultima being one of the game's super bosses and second most powerful summon. God, I hated this fight. Our more familiar pet monsters live on as the names of Imperial ships. The game had a lengthy and somewhat troubled development cycle. I've been reading quite a few developer interviews, and there was a lot of iteration, and even arguments with upper management about the direction of certain game elements. For example, Bash von Ronsenberg, a man in his prime and something of a grizzled disgraced knight, was the first character created and was meant to be the main protagonist of the story. However, as Kawazu points out here, what happened is that the previous game we worked on, Vagrant Story, which had a rather strong hero in his prime, didn't work at all and wasn't very popular. So we decided to start with a teenager to see if that would be more interesting for the public. This is clearly a very Japan-specific problem, as I don't think anyone would want Kratos replaced with a teenager. So more traditional, younger, shonen-style characters, who were actually some of the last created, were turned into the player's point of view characters. We'll dive a little more into this when we talk about the story and writing more later, but it wasn't exactly a bad move, considering the direction they were taking the game. 12 was very ambitious too. Hiroshi Minagawa, who was promoted into the director's chair after some late game restructuring, talked in an interview about the amount of ideas that the writers and the team had to cut in the end. It's quite normal for large portions of a game to be left on the cutting room floor, and having played this, I can tell you it's one of the most content-rich Final Fantasy games I've ever played, surpassing even 8 for its many hidden secrets and side paths to wander down. Minagawa even states that he thinks they maybe put too much into the game, but I will say that a lot of it appears on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. The developers were working on what was effectively an open-world experience with areas only locked off by the character's levels and loadout. They were creating a game that had much more of a focus on player-driven exploration and discovery, rather than large narrative set pieces with lots of exposition, and they were building an entirely new battle system, as well as a programmable AI system, all for the PlayStation 2, and they weren't even sure if the console was up to it. And then, things started to happen in the company at large. On April 1st, 2003, Square and its longtime rival and frenemy Enix merged. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to explain the whys and hows of this one, because it's somewhat above my pay grade. I will say that the creative forces of these two companies coming together seems like such an awesome idea on paper. Why compete when we can just share resources? Remember when we did that one time? Remember what we made? Don't you all love that game? However, it's the creation of the larger Square Enix corporate entity that ultimately turned the developer into a shadow of its former self. It's hard to say exactly if the merger had any effect on the day-to-day operations of Final Fantasy XII's development. Maybe one guy had to spend a day switching all the old letterheads for new ones. Maybe a bunch of Enix devs showed up to help out. Maybe a bunch of middle management types got fired. I don't know, but it happened. And while it was earth-shattering for the company, it wasn't quite as earth-shattering for Final Fantasy XII, as Mr. Matsuno having to step down as project leader in 2005 on account of his poor health. The specifics of this have been kept sketchy, and I fully respect both parties' rights to privacy in this situation. As part of the team restructuring, along with Hiroshi Minagawa's promotion, Akitoshi Kawazu of Saga and Last Remnant fame was brought in to help steer the ship into port by the next year. One misconception a lot of people have about this is that Matsuno's resignation was the reason behind the game's long development cycle, and that when Kawazu-san got brought in, the tables all got flipped and the game completely restructured. This couldn't be further from the truth. You only need to examine the timeline to see that that just simply isn't possible. But to quote programmer Takeshi Kitano here, the game pretty much followed the same track after Matsuno-san left. There wasn't a huge overhaul or anything like that. The playable version of the game had been shown at E3, and at that point, it was really a matter of polishing up the final product. Once he left, it was just a matter of, we'll take it from here, and following the path. But that's not to imply that it was smooth sailing the whole way. In another interview with French outlet Game Cult, Kawazu had this to say: Final Fantasy XII was an extremely ambitious, very rich game. Like a director who is forced to edit his film because it's too long, there are some passages that had to be removed to make it easier for players to get to grips with, in order to make it better. The development did indeed have some turmoil, because at the beginning, the game had gone a bit in all directions. By trying to do well, we did too much. Given that the game was originally developed jointly between the Play Online teams and those of Final Fantasy Tactics, the objectives of those teams were sometimes divergent. We had a game that developed in a somewhat anarchic way, and in the end we had to put everything back in place since the two teams were going in different directions. Indeed, because of these problems, we had to refocus, and it took a lot of time. So to what degree we can say that this finished game truly represents Matsuno's vision is open to speculation. If we think of it as putting a jigsaw puzzle together, and there are multiple pieces that you can fit in certain slots, we can't really know if Matsuno would have chosen the same pieces as Kawazu for each space. In the end though, hard decisions were made, fires were put out, and the teams were steered into a unified direction. Final Fantasy XII shipped in Japan in March 2006, and hit Western shores in October of the same year. It was universally praised by media outlets, even getting a score of 100 in Famitsu magazine. Critics loved the fresh take on the game series they knew so well, and applauded the bold direction things were going in. Sales reflected that too, with numbers easily on par with Final Fantasy X's launch, but the game didn't exactly get away unscathed. Of course there were purists who lamented the loss of the true turn-based combat, but the story and characters were probably the biggest point of criticism here. Because of the shift in focus from big narrative set pieces, there were a lot of fans who felt underwhelmed with what was on offer. I'm in that camp too, and we'll drill down into that more soon. However, at the end of it all, the game still sold well, is loved by many, and was clearly popular enough to warrant a full upgrade and overhaul for the PlayStation 4 and PC. So I guess all the work paid off. Prior to writing this part of the script, I basically had to dive into all my footage and rewatch all the cutscenes and story moments because, frankly, I'd completely forgotten more or less everything that happened. This isn't because the story is bad or anything, it's basically fine. But there's so much extra content padding out the game that it was easy to lose the plot threads even between chapters as I trekked across endless world spaces trying to get to the next story location, and backtracked and revisited everywhere multiple times to take care of clan hunts and Esper collections. And there's a whole rare hunt club that I didn't even touch in my 100-hour playthrough. Watching it all back, I can say that the story itself isn't bad, but it isn't super special either. It's a pretty cliched MacGuffin hunt with some interesting but not fully realized characters, none of whom go through anything like a big character arc, and there are no big twists or turns along the way. It's a shame because I really feel like these 5 characters at the very least have a lot of potential. They certainly start off in interesting places and present mysteries of their own to uncover. But despite having over 100 hours clocked up in this game now, I wouldn't say I know a great deal about any of them, or that I have a strong emotional connection to them outside of their utility in the many battles I've fought while playing this game. Also, not a single villain is interesting or memorable. Yep, Judge Cabranth looks kinda cool, but by the time he showed up for a fight I was like, oh yeah, you. I remember you. You're that guy from that one cutscene who's on the box for some reason. Well, I'm probably way overleveled for this fight at this point, so whatever. And yes, I was overleveled. I certainly think Dr. Sid had a lot of potential. Maybe if they'd focused more on him as the game's main enemy, I might have at least been invested in his downfall. But he only appears in a couple of scenes, acts a little weird, and then we have 2 boss fights with him and he's done. And don't even get me started on the angels or gods or whatever those things are that just show up out of nowhere, do one thing and then disappear again. Like, just don't. The biggest problem is one of pacing. There are vast stretches of traveling between locations and exploring dungeons that break up all the narrative moments. And if you decide to get involved in the game's big monster hunting side hustle as well, you may very well have forgotten why it was you were going somewhere by the time you get there. In some respects, having watched through my capture again, I regret taking on the side content as part of my first playthrough. But this game does have a greater focus on exploration and discovery, and it's always tantalizing to see where certain hooks will lead you. So I can't exactly be blamed for taking the game up on its offer to show me more, and the main story suffering as a result. So let's take a look at what's on offer here. The story of Final Fantasy XII is, well, it's fine. It has all the things you'd expect from a fantasy adventure story. There's a knight, a princess, a pirate, with a furry-style companion, who's being chased by a bounty hunter, an evil empire, with an army of faceless stormtroopers who can't actually fight worth a damn, an alliance of resistance cells who unite into a big fleet, a weapon of mass destruction, a black knight who's related to one of our heroes, another family connection between our heroes and villains because one apparently wasn't enough, a magic sword, another magic sword, and a mysterious source of power that we can wield, or that can potentially wield us. Another pirate who runs a pirate town, a flying city, a desert full of masked raiders, and all of this told from the point of view of 2 naive side characters who are in way over their heads and don't really have any good reason to stick around after the first act. Yeah, this game wants to be Star Wars so bad it hurts. This was actually brought up in interviews with the developers, and they insisted that, while they are fans, they weren't really trying to copy it. But this is more than a passing resemblance. Now, Star Wars is a science fiction retelling of classic Arthurian legends and Japanese samurai movies. So maybe it's drawing from the same inspiration pool, but for me personally, a lot of this cuts just a little too close for comfort. I could be projecting, but it's not like I was hanging around Final Fantasy XII subreddits or watching a bunch of reviews on it before I played it, so no one really put this idea in my head. I'm just calling what I see. That doesn't make it bad, of course. You can do much worse than copying one of the most influential science fiction movies ever made, but I'm sure they could have got the actual license for it if they'd wanted it that bad. While the opening cutscene is spectacular, and shows that Square was still at the absolute top of their game when it came to cinematic cutscenes, this whole opening is kinda weird. We get two big, flashy, somewhat disconnected scenes, followed by a text crawl, and then a tutorial dungeon before we even get to control our main protagonist. All of this stuff actually takes place about 2 years before the game begins, and while it's perfectly fine, it could have easily been a few lines of exposition made by an NPC in a bar somewhere, and we'd still have been able to follow exactly what was happening in the game, and maybe got control of our characters a little faster. We open on an absolutely spectacular parade, happening in the streets of a vast walled city called Rabanasta. The scene establishes we are in a world with multiple sentient races, living in an extravagant city, built in the middle of a desert, with all kinds of Mediterranean-style architecture and vibes filling the air. We are witnessing what seems to be a wedding procession, as a young couple dressed in ceremonial wardrobe that no doubt raises their horny stats while lowering their inhibitions, are led through the streets to the cheering and adoration of crowds of people. As well as Humes, we see lizard-like bangers, hog-like Sikh, a few rabbit-eared Vieira, and a lot of adorable little Mughals, and that's not going to be all we'll encounter by the end. No sooner has the ceremony been completed and the nuptial vows been made, and we find ourselves in the middle of an intense war council of sorts, where people we've yet to be introduced to are telling us that a place we've never heard of is being attacked by an enemy we don't know anything about. What's very telling here is the old guy, who is actually King Raminas of Dalmasca, is less interested in the fate of, checks notes, Nabudis, for its own sake, and more for the fact that once it falls, this unknown enemy will have direct access to this place. So, this marriage was just one of political convenience, huh? At least the prince is hot in that Shonen Jump kind of way. So the prince, this grizzled knight looking dude, and some kind of army rush off to get into battle, and the spectacle is once again jaw-dropping and... they are trying so hard to be Star Wars, it's painful. Anyway, the main city seems to be protected by a giant magic crystal that's preventing the airships above from raining down destruction on the world below. We see the mages powering this thing get taken out by soldiers, and the protect spell crumbles. As the prince makes some kind of fighting retreat, an arrow takes him in the chest, and he's done. Cut to the funeral, and then... a text crawl? I have opinions, but let's just stick with the narrative for now, and we'll get back to it. So it's now explained that the city where we saw the wedding is the capital of a kingdom called Dalmasca, an independent state that's basically sandwiched between two massive empires, and the gateway between those two waging war on each other. The wedding was between Dalmasca's Princess Ashalia and Lord Rasla, who was heir to their neighbouring kingdom of Nabradir. The alliance was meant to create a unified state between the two kingdoms, one that was much stronger and better able to defend itself against either of the encroaching empires of Rosaria and Arcadia. I suspect the idea was that while they knew even united they wouldn't stand much of a chance, they reasoned neither nation wanted to take the hit to their military power that an invasion would invite, for fear of the other empire capitalizing on that weakness. Arcadia had decided to seize the initiative and overpower Nabradir before the alliance was fully secured, and when the counterattack from Dalmasca failed, it left them crippled, and basically brought them to the bargaining table to hand over their kingdom to the more powerful empire. There's a few details missing from this description, but once this has all been laid out, and if all the names and places didn't just make your eyes roll back into your head and your ears shut down, here's a quick diagram, just in case. Finally, we can now actually take control of a character, and we can start the tutorial dungeon. Given the massive changes that were made to the systems in this game, I appreciate this tutorial. I know we're all a bit fed up of being told to move with the left stick and look with the right, but remember, this was the first single-player Final Fantasy to have a completely unlocked camera at all times. The situation is that the King of Dalmasca has come to sign a treaty with Arcadia to end the war, and these knights are here because foul play is suspected. Our point of view character here is Rex, who is actually the older brother of our main point of view character, Varn. Our guide is the grizzled knight from before, aka Bash von Ronsenberg. We experience the basics of combat, spellcasting, a small boss fight, and even running for our lives only to arrive to discover we are too late. King Ramenas was slain before a treaty could be signed. But who would do such a thing, you might ask? It would seem our noble knight here is more loyal to his country than his king. Rather than see the king hand over Dalmasca to Arcadia, he sabotages the whole thing, and as Rex's vision slowly fades to black, we see Bash arrested and dragged off. We then get another text crawl, explaining that, in the aftermath of this event, Dalmasca basically had to surrender without terms or face utter annihilation from Arcadia. That the knight Bash von Ronsenberg had been executed for regicide, and that in her grief for the loss of her husband and then her father, the Princess Ashelia had taken her own life. There's nothing left but for the Dalmascans to lay down their arms and accept their new place in the world. If I'm being honest, it feels more like someone paid money for the cutscenes long before the final draft of the story was on the table, and then when they realized how much things had changed since the first draft, they had to somehow force the game to start here, rather than have this section show up in a flashback or something later. The monologues especially feel like something added at the very last minute when the money had dried up, and they just wanted to shove this thing out of the door. The Wikipedia article hints at this being the case, but its source on this links to a tweet that no longer exists, so it's anyone's guess what happened here really. With all the epic stuff out of the way, we can zoom into a much smaller world as we finally get control of our point of view character for the next 100 or so hours in the form of Vaan. Continuing a time-honored RPG tradition here, Vaan begins his journey by testing out his impressive combat prowess on rats. But these heroic feats are not what we're here for. We're actually here to get a look at Rabanastre under Imperial control. While it doesn't exactly seem like some kind of authoritarian dystopia, we are seeing soldiers of a foreign power march around like they own the place and randomly shaking people down. So while they may not be getting black-bagged in the street just for their skin tone, there's plenty of tension between the locals and the occupying forces. This is also where we'll get to meet Penelo for the first time. She's Vaan's younger, better half. Not a blood relative, but as close to a little sister as he's going to get. Between the war and a plague that hit the city before it, Rabanastre now has a lot of orphans who are in constant need of a safe place to sleep and some food to put on their plate. There are people who are doing their best to help though. Guys like Megallo here give them work when they can and pay them for their troubles. Vaan, however, has his sights set on a bigger goal, one that will see him literally soaring through the clouds. There's a lot of work to do in the city today though, as the official Imperial Consul of Arcadia is finally coming to take up his seat of office, and there is a full-blown military parade and feast planned in his honor. After doing a few more tutorial level tasks and taking our first step down a role that will lead us, here. We finally get to see Lord Vane, son of none other than the Emperor of Arcadia himself. Arriving in the city to considerably less approval than the wedding ceremony we saw previously. Vane, however, makes it clear that he isn't here as a conquering hero who has come to subjugate his new flock and drag them into line. His rousing speech is one of peace and humility. He has come here to win their trust and respect, not their fear and obedience. The people want their lives to just return to normal, and he assures them that that is exactly what he wants too. He speaks humbly to those of lower stations than himself, and he refuses to be addressed by titles. In terms of invading dictators, I'd say Rabanastre has lucked out. Vaan is hardly convinced though. The cocky young thief wants to strike at the Arcadians the only way he knows how.
So we think we should prank call a bunch of policemen and have pizza sent to them that they didn't order. Viva la resistance!
By breaking into the royal palace and taking back the riches they stole from his people. Though I suspect there are limits on how far he's planning to redistribute said wealth. As with all things, there are hoops to jump through and favors to do for people, and we even learn a little about team combat before we are in a position to begin this mad crusade. As the city darkens though, and Vaan begins his underground approach into the heavily guarded castle, we see that there are plenty of people in Rabanastre, who aren't happy with the Arcadian occupation, and they have plans of their own to attend the festivities tonight. I'm sure this won't go wrong in the most spectacular way. Since Final Fantasy isn't a stealth game, and putting together those kinds of mechanics just for a single section wouldn't be a very productive use of anyone's time, we resort to more Saturday morning cartoon tactics for getting into the palace treasury, and as our boy is realizing he really should have brought some kind of bag with him, some real Tomb Raider shit pops off. This is the moment that the leading man enters the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Sky Pirate and all-around suave bastard, Balthier, and his oddly specific fetish partner, Fran. It would seem that they too are in the business of relieving the royal treasury of some loot. Specifically, the stone Vaughn has just lifted for himself. This game of knifey spoony gets interrupted though, when the resistance fighters we saw earlier erupt into the palace and all hell breaks loose. With the guards now at a fever pitch and out for blood, our thieves really don't want to be found with their fingers in the taxman's honeypot. Outside, all manner of chaos is breaking out on the grounds, and, as if someone knew this would happen, a massive airship called the Ifrit glides out of cloud cover and proceeds to use excessive force to end this less than peaceful protest. This ends with our new trio of best friends deciding to slip out of the castle via the sewers, but even this proves to be anything but a safe bet. The sewers house their own brand of threats, but we soon discover Imperial soldiers who've backed a familiar-looking young lady up against a ledge, and Vaughn takes it upon himself to get involved. Don't go thinking this is going to be a Tidus Yuna thing. Trust me, the young lady is still grieving, and she and Vaughn barely exchange a dozen lines in the entire story. She introduces herself as Amalia, and together the group evade the soldiers and other fiends, and almost make it out. However, at the last second, after a harrowing boss fight, they are surrounded by Arcadian soldiers and arrested. Amalia is hauled off to somewhere unknown, but Vaughn, Balthier and Fran are shipped off to a prison in a place called Nalbina. And as a distressed Penelo tries to reach her brother, Balthier hands her a little token for safekeeping, just until he can get her brother back to her. Smooth bastard. Nalbina prison seems to be little more than a hole to throw people in and leave them to die. As Vaughn comes to, he very quickly comes face to face with his new reality, but Balthier has the bearing of a man who's had to escape captivity more than once, and it seems Fran is already on the case of getting them out of here. Vaughn, however, decides to dabble in prison politics, an action that soon sees him and Balthier going toe-to-toe with some of their fellow inmates. This exchange comes to an abrupt end though, when the doors open and heavily armed guards flood into the place. Not long after, 3 unsavory-looking bangers come in, and they are looking for someone. These 3 are bounty hunters, and it would seem they've got their eyes set on quite the prize with Balthier. He, unfortunately for them, is too well concealed to be found with a cursory glance though. And when the bounty hunters decide to take their frustrations out on the other guards, a powerful and somewhat muffled voice cuts him down, and a dark figure takes center stage. This is Judge Gabranth. Judges in Arcadia seem to share the same level of unrestricted authority as judges in Mega City 1. However, where those judges are generally one-man or woman armies unto themselves, with Big Joe keeping entire city-sized blocks in line just by his reputation alone, Gabranth and his ilk also serve as military commanders and have plenty of underlings at their disposal. While he is one of many, he is also the figure from the box art and, seemingly, cast as our primary antagonist. Though Final Fantasy is quite fond of pulling the rug from under us in that regard. Since the magic doors in this place aren't just going to open by themselves, Balthier and Fran seize upon the opportunity to follow the Imperials closely and slip through the doors behind them. This plan has a moderate amount of success, depending on your skill level at the game. So obviously I failed and just had to bludgeon my way out. In the heart of Nalbina Fortress, we discover what Gabranth is actually doing here though. It would seem the Kingslayer is still alive and well, and kept in great discomfort. And do I detect a kind of family resemblance here? Well. The plot thickens. Gabranth goads Bash on the capture of a girl named Amalia, seemingly probing for some kind of reaction, and when he doesn't get one, he leaves him to consider his fate for a moment, and our heroes emerge from their hiding spot. Bash first pleads for aid to escape, but Vaughn takes this opportunity to unleash 2 years of pent-up rage about his brother on the metal bars separating the two of them. When the noise attracts attention, Fran opts for the most direct escape plan she can think of, and all of them take a long ride down into the depths of Nalbina Fortress. While Bash is brought in as just a spare sword at first, he soon comes to understand the source of Vaughn's hatred when he reveals that he's Rex's brother, and it's here that Bash lays out his version of the events. You see, Gabranth doesn't just have a passing family resemblance to Bash. They look exactly the same. They're twins, so it's a good job they weren't born in an entirely different game. The backstory isn't exactly explained in full here, but they were separated for a long time, and Bash actually thought his brother was dead as a result of their homeland being wiped out, when in fact he had become a soldier in the Arcadian military and eventually climbed to the rank of Judge Magister. The Empire set up the whole show to have Rex serve as a witness to Bash's treason, and after testifying, the poor kid ended up, well, he certainly never recovered, let's put it that way. While Vaughn doesn't exactly trust Bash right away, they fight their way out of Nalbina depths through an area called the Barheim Passage together. The gimmick of this first dungeon is there are mimics constantly draining the power, and they need to be stopped because things apparently get really bad in the dark. This is also where we first hear mention of something called the Mist. Something connected to magic and monsters, but it's not really elaborated on. Final Fantasy IX players might have a hint or two about it though. Our boss here is a mimic queen, and the fight leads to the entrance collapsing in on itself moments after we escape, meaning we won't be returning there for a while. The crew manage to return to Rabanasta, and with their business concluded, they decide to part ways. Bash goes looking for the Resistance, Balthea and Fran find a bar to drink in, and Vaughn decides he needs to sell this weird crystal he took out of the royal treasury, as the damn thing has brought him nothing but bad luck since he picked it up. Unfortunately, while Vaughn's brief foray into political activism may be over in his mind, it isn't actually over with him. His fixer tasks him with delivering a sword to a Resistance member, who we soon realise is actually Bash. It would seem no sooner had the grizzled knight walked through the front door, and the word of his return had reached the underworld here. Vaughn, very quickly, has to find himself standing up for Bash and his brother against this guy, Vossler. While some of the Resistance seem willing to take a hero of Rabanasta like Bash at his word about his evil twin brother, others aren't so easily convinced. A powerful figure called the Marquis, who was actually our narrator for the shoehorned-in text crawls, and who we're going to be meeting very soon, declared both Bash a traitor and Princess Ashe dead, though we know he wasn't correct about at least one of those statements now. Vaughn turning up to speak out on his brother's behalf seems very timely. As Bash points out, Rex was the perfect witness to his supposed treachery. Having the words spill from the mouth of a dedicated soldier is what made the lie all the more believable. Since the Resistance took a hell of a blow by walking into Vane's trap at the banquet though, Vossler isn't ready to just take the word of a recently resurrected traitor about his twin brother and put his men's necks on the line again, even to rescue an important member like Amalia. While he isn't willing to help Bash though, he isn't going to stop him either. So Bash requests Vaughn take him to see Balthea in order to pay him for passage to Bujerba, where he can talk face to face with the Marquis and assure him that the rumours of his death were greatly exaggerated. Fate has twisted the knife again though. When we find Balthea and Fran, the Sky Pirate is being chewed out by Miguelo because bounty hunters have taken Penelo. After the scene she caused at Balthea's arrest, the hunters tracked her down and took her to Lushu Mines in Bujerba. Convenient that. They expect Balthea to go there to rescue her and put himself in their snare in the process. While our leading man doesn't exactly say no to this obvious trap, It takes Vaan offering up his stolen treasure as payment to get him completely on board. And so our team pile into the Sky Pirate's ship and set sail for the skies and the floating city of Buzerba. Buzerba is quite the spectacle, and arriving here we can really see that the devs weren't messing around when it came to putting the fantasy in Final Fantasy. I'm not exactly sure why these islands float, but it probably has something to do with the veins of magicite housed in their rocks. Magicite is a magically infused mineral. It's not exactly the same thing as materia, but it's along similar lines, and most magic products, especially airship engines, are powered up with this stuff. It's also the main export of this place, which is scary because if that ore is actually what keeps this island afloat, I worry about what'll happen when it's all shipped off to be used elsewhere. Buzerba enjoys a mostly politically neutral status as a result. Everyone needs the ore, and it's better to play on their terms than get pushy and risk just being cut off. After touching down and walking around, not exactly keeping their identities or current plans a secret, they attract the attention of a young man named Lamont. Overhearing that the crew are heading directly for the mines, he asks if he can join up with them as he has his own errand to attend to there, and the place can be quite dangerous. Ignoring the oddity of a boy heading into a monster-infested location for any reason at all, never mind that they are en route to a date with dangerous bounty hunters, the team lets him come along, and we take our first of many trips into this dark place. Balthier is at least cautious, and this isn't exactly the first time he seemed to have known more than he lets on, and is just playing his cards close to his chest. While exploring, the first oddity they encounter is none other than the Marquis himself, wandering these mines with both judges and a host of Imperial soldiers as his escort. This seemingly confirms rumours that are abound that he's supplying Arcadia with the best magicite. There are other rumours, however, that he's also secretly financing the Dalmascan resistance. So maybe he's playing both sides? Venturing deeper into the mines though, Lamont lets his hand slip. The young man is testing the magicite in the mines against this odd little trinket, something called nethicite. This has the property of absorbing magic and mist around it. This nethicite in particular is manufactured in the Drakelaw laboratory in Arcadia, a name that our leading man reacts to like the kid just stamped on an open wound. This exchange gets cut short, however, when our bounty hunters pounce. Not needing their bait anymore, they've already released Penelo to let the creatures of the mine have her. So with no incentive to stick around, the crew leg it, beginning a chase back the way they came. Lamont arrives at the entrance to the mine first, to be warmly greeted by the judge, who recognizes him as Larsa, the Emperor's second son, and the brother to Vane. This judge is named Geese, and while he expresses distress at the thought of the little lordling walking around without his official escort, he knows better than to pry. He also arrested Penelo as she fled the mines. Since Larsa knows why she was actually there though, he could just tell Geese the whole story. But he's playing a game of his own too, and instead uses the power of his station to simply saunter off with the girl on his arm.
That was unexpected.
With Penelo seemingly safe and the bounty hunters evaded for now, it's time for Bash to have his meeting with the Marquis. They need to go through the resistance to get to him though. To gain access to them, they, for some reason, have Vaan run around the city shouting that he's Captain Bash to everyone who sees him. The idea is to stir up a rumour and have the resistance come to investigate. But, they've got the actual Bash right here, haven't they? And they've already interacted with one of the resistance cells in Rabanasta. Why not just have him start up the rumour mill? And who is going to believe that this kid with an annoying nasally voice is actually some legendary knight and kingslayer anyway? Absurdities aside, because this is Final Fantasy, so we should be used to it by now. The crew make contact with the local resistance cell, who confirm the Marquis is collaborating with them to thwart the Arcadians, and they set up a meeting. The Marquis, it seemed, didn't actually know that Basch was still alive, and when Basch declares his intentions to rescue the resistance leader named Amalia, the cogs start turning in the old man's head. After all, he was also the man who announced that Princess Ashe had taken her own life, something he was instructed to do by Vayne. The conversation with the Marquis takes an odd turn, as he explains to Basch his delicate political position, and something unspoken seems to pass between them, leading to Basch drawing his sword and the guards being summoned to arrest them, all just in time for Judge Gease's dreadnought the Leviathan to arrive and take them back to Rabanastre as prisoners. Brought aboard the ship though, they are soon reunited with Amalia, and her identity as the late Princess Ashe is revealed to everyone. Believing the story that Basch murdered her father, she's less than happy to see him. However, it would seem that without some kind of proof of her heritage, she will be tried as a common fraud and meet her fate at the gallows. Basch explains, however, that a special magic stone called the Dusk Shard would be able to prove the potency of her blood. At that moment, things get really weird when the odd crystal Vaan stole from the treasury starts reacting to her presence. It turns out this crystal is the Dusk Shard. What a convenient coincidence! A piece of real, deifacted nethicite. Deifacted. From a deity. Got it? A gift from the gods to one of Ashe's ancestors named King Wraithwall, a ruler from long ago who united all the ancient lands into the greatest kingdom that had ever existed. It's the closest thing she can get to a DNA test here. Vaan barters the stone in exchange for a stay of execution, and the group are taken away to be locked in the brig. Fran and Balthier have clearly done this before though, and are very prepared to seize their first opportunity to escape, and at that moment a judge removes his helmet and we see Vossler has managed to sneak aboard the ship too. It would seem the Marquis was actually playing his own 5D chess game all along, and with this absolute juggernaut backing us up, we rip through the enemy lines and make a break for freedom. Along the way we bump into Larsa and Penelo, and she is safely returned back to Vaan and becomes a permanent party member. Which is great because I was really hurting for the lack of a white mage at this point in the game. Larsa has no qualms in letting the princess and her entourage escape either. It seems he has a 5D chess gambit of his own to play. And fully reunited, we are able to confront Judge Gease in combat, where we get a first-hand demonstration of the power of nethicite.
What was that?
And then get to one-shot him with a missed attack chain. The crew rush aboard an Imperial ship and casually sail out of the Leviathan like they're just another troop transport off to run some errands. But now what? While the crew manage to escape back to the safety of Brugerba, they've lost the Dust Shard, meaning Ashe has no proof of her birthright. Even if the Resistance could push the Imperial forces out of Dalmasca, she could never prove her heritage to the Grand Kiltias, a kind of religious leader, and assume her place on the throne. Cool. Just set up a democracy like everyone else then. What's the problem? Do you actually want to free Dalmasca, or are you simply interested in re-establishing old entrenched power structures that put you in a position of wealth and luxury? You know what? Don't answer that. Basically, all this pushes Ashe down the road of needing to find the last known piece of deifacted nethicite that she's aware of, that being the Dawn Shard that's kept in the tomb of King Wraithwall himself. The Marquis, however, wants to keep her in Brugerba where he can protect her. So, she pays Balthier to kidnap her. Can't imagine where they got the idea of a princess asking a sky pirate to do that from. Promising him treasures from within Wraithwall's tomb, and they fly off to do some tomb raiding. However, because just flying there would be too easy, Ivalice has some made-up bullshit to inconvenience the player. I mean, it has these weird Bermuda Triangle style areas where sky stones don't work and ships don't fly for like totally logical and well-explained reasons. At least until they decide they can for plot reasons. So after dealing with Ewok Sand People, and honestly getting our first taste of the time commitment this game expects of us, the crew battle the various traps and monsters of the tomb until they come face to face with the Gigas, Ivalice. This is our first Esper. In an ancient time, the Seraph, Ultima, rebelled against the gods and rallied a host to her aid. These fallen betrayers were overthrown and banished into the realms of mortals, and should they be bested in combat, will become bound to them. Ivalice is actually the treasure of Wraithwall's tomb. Having been bound to the Dynast King in his life, he was left here to hold vigil all this time upon his death. Balthier is, needless to say, disappointed. Unfortunately for the party though, no sooner do they resurface from the tomb, and the Leviathan and an entire division of the Arcadian fleet are just hovering above the tomb. Somehow. Waiting to take them back into custody and help themselves to the Nether site. And this time, rather than Vossler being here to help us, dun dun dun, he was a traitor all along. So tired of the needless bloodshed, he just wants the fighting to end and is now seeking the path of least resistance. As our party is dragged off back to the dungeons again, Geese decides to stress test the Dawnshard's power in his ship engines to make sure it's legit. Unfortunately for him, Deifacted Netherite is many times more powerful than what the Draculaur Laboratory are putting out. The overload supercharges the mist in the air around them and sends Fran into a berserker rage that leads to another desperate escape, this time with us putting the beat down on Vossler, before we hop onto another Imperial ship and Battlestar Galactica the hell out of there. And just in time because...
This might get a little dicey.
The mist. It manifests now.
Is that what you call this?
Okay, that was a lot. Like all Final Fantasies, we've got quite a few characters and threads moving around and intersecting with each other that we need to bring up before any deeper analysis can begin. But I think we've got all the pieces on the board now. We know who the players are, and we've established the stakes. So before we go any further into the story and uncover the late game spoilers, let's talk about the rest of the game. Ivalice is without a doubt the real star of Final Fantasy XII. It is a rich, vibrant world on a scale unlike anything the series had ever seen before. It has huge and varied environments that range from deserts and plains, to frozen peaks, deep mines, and even floating cities, with just about everything in between. But not only do we get to explore a variety of beautiful handcrafted world spaces, we get to meet a diverse collection of cultures that range from small secluded settlements of tribal people, all the way up to immense Magitech-powered cities full of flying vehicles, and somehow... the developers made all this fit together into a seamless world that actually feels believable. This is without a doubt Final Fantasy XII's crowning achievement, and the best part of the game. I've argued in previous videos that I think exploration of a world is at the very core of an RPG. That all the things we do in the game, such as complete quests, fight bad guys, upgrade our gear, and so on, is in the service of this larger goal of traveling a world and becoming lost in all its intricacies. This is easier to see in more open-world Western-type RPGs than it is in narrative-led JRPGs, but it's very easy to see here. All the monster hunts and treasure hunting, all the reasons to revisit areas and go searching for secret paths and treasures, all of it serves to deliver this living, breathing world that is pulsing with life, for you to just absolutely murder the crap out of non-stop. I mean, for you to explore and fall in love with. So since this is the real story, let's tuck in. To begin with, Final Fantasy XII isn't a world-spanning adventure like all the others. Our story and exploration only covers about a country's worth of space this time. Dalmasca is bordered by two large empires, and while we get to visit the very capital of Arcadia, I've no doubt there's all kinds of interesting cities and settlements to be explored within the Imperial borders that we just never see, and we don't go anywhere near the Rosarian Empire at all. So while the world is on a smaller scale this time, the depth and detail of the space that we do get to explore is much greater. I feel like we've already taken a good look at Rabanastre in the setup. It's a melting pot of races and cultures, all crammed into this hot mashup of Mediterranean and Arabic architecture, and surrounded by deserts on all sides. The southern part of those deserts, though, does have a hell of a rainy season, during which the entire landscape is completely transformed by the weather, and the enemy levels jump up in orders of magnitude. We've also encountered several races in the game already. Bangers and Sikhs are common in most of the locations around the world, and seem to have integrated well with Hume civilization. We've got at least one Viera in our party, but why don't we meet the Gareth? The Gareth are physically imposing creatures who wear masks. Far from being a tribe of warriors though, they are actually herders who live to the far southwest of Dalmasca. We can encounter them out in the wilds, testing their mettle against various enemies as we approach their homeland. To arrive here, we must cross the vast Osmone Plain, a place littered with the corpses of ancient airships that fell from the sky in some long ago war. And this isn't the only location with remnants of the world's history littering the floor. The Ogier Sandsea is stained by massive rusting structures that once sucked oil out of the earth to burn for energy. This fuel and these platforms, now long abandoned in the favour of magicite, have become home to a less hospitable people, though not ones without their own culture. The Gareth's usual combat tactic seems to be to berserk their foe to force it into physical combat where they have the advantage. While they are certainly physically powerful, and we even have to talk to their war chief as part of our quest, they are actually quite peaceful people. For the most part, visitors are welcome among their kind. It's only recent tensions and events that leads them to being standoffish when the party meets them, and while there are warriors among their tribe, there are also herders and merchants. The Gareth have no use for machines and little value for possessions. Their homes are simple and built from materials given up to them by the land. They are a people who seek to live in harmony with their world, and their religion seems very shamanic. It would seem that long ago in the past, the gods gave the gift of Nethicite to the Gareth too, but when they were unable to use it, the gods, much like a child who thinks his friends are playing with his toys the wrong way, grew angry and took it away from them. Instead bestowing it upon Wraithwall and transforming him into the Dynast King. In some ways, I'd say the Gareth lucked out. What use have a people such as they for power over nations? The Numont are another species that we can encounter, and seem very inspired by the Uru from the Dark Crystal, and occupy a similar mystical role. While a few of them are found around the world, the majority of them are found at Mount Bur Omisase. This is the holy ground of the dominant religion in this region of Ivalice, and it's where we find its Grand Cathedral and their eternally dreaming leader, the Gran Kiltius. These creatures are very powerful in the ways of magic, and know a great deal about old lore, especially the Espers. A few of them are even responsible for helping us acquire a couple of them too. All of these creatures, and our cast of characters, were designed by Akihiko Yoshida, a man whose credits go back even before Tactics Ogre. He worked on Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, and would go on to work on the amazing Nier Automata and Octopath Traveler after this game too. The man certainly has his signature style, especially those minimalist noses. Oh, also, this? Yeah, god tier cosplay for anyone who can pull it off. To be honest, I was actually taken back a little by some of the designs at first. That's not what a Moogle looks like, my voice protested when I first saw them here. My gut reaction was, Why are you trying to be so different? But that's only because I had just started the game and couldn't yet see how well everything was put together. It didn't take long for me to get lost in all this though. One major criticism I have is about creature variety.
What are you talking about, Arkham? Haven't you seen the Hunt Primer? There's tons of creatures in this game.
Well, yeah, but they all kinda just look the same to me. I get that just changing the colour palette of a monster we've already encountered isn't exactly new for Final Fantasy. Hell, it goes way further back than that. But the amount of times I arrived in a new area and found the same reskinned wolf over and over and over and over. Well, it got a little tedious. I think this might be a problem with the choice to have the creatures always on the screen versus random battles. It lets us kind of see the tricks the game usually hides about creature variety. Even the majority of the boss creatures and hunt marks are just reskinned versions of regular enemies, with all the same animations. That's not to say these are bad, some of them are absolutely jaw-dropping, but it's still just a little disappointing when you realise this new enemy is just this other enemy in a bigger coat. Taking a lot of lessons from Final Fantasy XI, the team created massive environments that were split down into smaller world spaces separated by loading screens. Each environment has tons of detail though, with things like old ruins out in the fields that make us wonder about what used to be here, beautiful beaches and coastal regions, and the immense amount of clutter we find in shops in Rabanasta and other places. There's just so much detail jammed into each area. I'm still kind of amazed that all this once fit onto a DVD and could have been run by a PS2. I mean, you had to purchase a separate 80 gig hard drive for the PS2 if you wanted to play Final Fantasy XI on it, and it's the first console game to ever receive a patch. No doubt the scale and ambition of the project was one of the reasons the development was so long and troubled. Crossing such an immense world space, you'd hope there would be fast travel options to help players get around, especially for returning to locations. Well, think again. This is another area where they took a lot of inspiration from Final Fantasy XI. That game has very limited transportation options, and many of them are gated off behind quests and levels. When you show up, you can hoof it out of the front door and return to your crystal when you die. And something very similar is in play here. There are blue save crystals that will refresh your party and let you save your progress, but the orange ones will allow you to teleport to other orange crystals that you've already interacted with. These are spread out across the major regions, and you have to pay with teleport stones to use them. And there aren't enough of them by half in my opinion. You can generally get into a region, but then you'll still have a lot of running and battling to do to get to a mission critical location after that. And it's all just so tedious after the 5th time around. Also, you have to remember the obscure names of the maps they lead to, as it doesn't show you where they are on the world map when you're cycling through the list. The saving grace here is that while you need to spend teleport stones to use them, you receive a steady drip of them from the clan hunts, and they can be bought on airships in a pinch. Airships, you say? Just like Balthia's? Surely we can use that to zip to anywhere we want to? No, you can't, because... yeah, that's never explained either. But you can hand over a couple of 100 gil and sail the skies to one of several places that you've already visited. You can either pay for a private room, which basically just teleports you there, implying you just slept through the whole trip, or you can spend a little time wandering the ship and enjoying the ride. There's a merchant on every route who will have different medicine, and one of these shops is the only place earlier in the game where you'll get the serums that remove disease, which is one of the worst new statuses in the game. You'll also be able to buy teleport stones from another merchant here. There's a small quest related to talking to one person on each airship, and one monster hunt that happens on the deck of one of these ships too. So it is worth getting immersed in the journey now and then. As mentioned earlier, there are areas in Ivalice called yachts, where a combination of mist and magicite interferes with sky stones and prevents specifically Balthea's ship, from just taking people wherever they want to go. Apparently, the Imperials have new plot armor skystones or something. We do eventually get an upgrade to the ship that lets us use it as another fast travel option, but these landing locations are also limited. Overall though, I'd say I prefer this method of fast travel to something like Skyrim's. Being able to just jump anywhere you want at almost any time with little consequence does take the immersion out of an epic adventure. But I'd say Final Fantasy XII pulls the rudder too far in the opposite direction. There are just too many places that require long treks to return to, even when you do use fast travel options to get you as close as possible. Thanks to the remaster's fast forward feature, something I promised myself I wouldn't use when I started playing the game, yeah, that didn't work out. A lot of this grind can be cut down, but there were definitely a lot of deeper dungeons that needed their own teleport stones for when players either needed to return to the world and restock their supplies, or return to the dungeon to take care of a hunt or some other kind of questing later. Of all the varied locations we visit though, none of them left quite as big an impression as the city of Arcades, the lost city of Geruvagan, and the Great Crystal. If you've played this game, then you're probably expecting a rant connected to that last one. You will not be disappointed. Arcades seems like a place out of another game. It's a world of towering structures and luxury flying vehicles. It's as alien to Rabanasta as Midgar is to Calm. Similar to Midgar, Arcades has its own slums. Since we sneak into this place through an ancient cave network, this is actually the area we emerge into. Class divide is just as strong here in Arcades as it is in Midgar. You either have, or you don't. If you don't, you are relegated to an existence in Old Arcades. While not exactly a filthy slum, it's certainly not a place with hot water and frozen food. The people here gather in these old structures for shelter and try to etch out some small living, trading in trinkets or information. They are kept out of the upper city by soldiers. After all, when you're living a life of wealth and luxury, you don't want to be inconvenienced by the hard truths about how the other half lives. Better to demonize them to justify segregation. They're just lazy thieves, and we're all safer if they're kept away from us. Geruvagan is an ancient lost city located in the heart of a mist-enshrouded forest, populated by all manner of terrifying creatures, including none other than Final Fantasy's legendary Behemoth King. He doesn't cast Meteor when he dies this time. Go figure. Most who seek this place become lost in the mist and fall victim to the many creatures that inhabit this land. And any that do manage to find this place will find it sealed off to anyone who does not have Belias to aid them. I actually had to Google this one. By the time I got here, it had been so long since I'd caught Belias that I could not remember that he was referred to as the Gigas. And that's the hint the riddle gives you. Even so, passing through only takes you into even more monster-infested corridors and a Magitech labyrinth. What these monsters are eating to stay alive is anyone's guess. Maybe that's why there's so many undead in the optional areas. In the depths of this place though, we find the Great Crystal. This place is something of a mystery. The crystal spews forth mist and magicite, and could be the source of nethicite in this world. We are required to explore here first as part of the main story, but there is a massive optional labyrinth to explore for those who have the mental stamina and a strong enough party to do so. Atop the crystal peak is where we'll encounter the Seraph Ultima and find the greatsword Excalibur, and along the way you'll be able to find several other powerful spells and weapons, but honestly, exploring this place isn't fun at all. Ignoring the hordes of endlessly respawning enemies for a moment, the map straight up doesn't work here, and all the platforms look more or less exactly the same. No problem, you might say. I'm an old gamer. I know how this works. I'll just bust out a pad and a pen and draw my own damn map, just like we did in the old days. Now, what are the names of these locations? Aldo B... Is that B or V? Okay, G, La, Pra, Va. Okay, got it. What's up next? Aldo, B, G, Lam, Pra, T, Va. Wait. Aren't those the same? Yeah, you aren't getting through this without a guide. It feels like the devs did literally everything in their power to make this place as infuriating as possible to navigate. And of course, if you get frustrated and decide to leave and come back, well, guess what? There's no red crystal down here either. So you're going to have to do all this crap again at least twice if you want to fight your way back out the way you came and maybe come back and try again later. Oh, then there's these doors that are on these time switches. Each switch operates 2 doors, and you can only have one open at a time. Not that the game goes out of its way to tell you that. No, you just have to find out the hard way, fighting the same respawning enemies every step of the way. So you need a map to plan your route to specific places because you've got to sprint to these as quickly as possible, and you'll have to do it multiple times, changing routes towards the end if you want to loot everything. This dungeon is a spectacular lesson in how devs really waste their players' time with needless padding. It's completely unfair and just shitty, if I'm being honest. As well as Ultima, you can find the air quotes super boss Omega down here too. And that is, I don't know, a battle that we can have. Were it not for Excalibur's holy damage being priceless in late game dungeons, especially optional ones, I would honestly say, just skip this place. There's very little here that's worth the time investment if all you want to do is finish the story. I honestly cannot fathom the minds that would think that this is some kind of reasonable challenge that players would enjoy taking on, and I've yet to encounter anyone who enjoyed exploring this area. Devs, you are not supposed to make your game unfun. Anyway, with that off my chest, let's talk about the cast. I wish I had more to say about the cast of Final Fantasy XII, because honestly, most of them seem to be pretty interesting when we first meet them. But outside of combat, none of them really have a lot of screen time to develop in any interesting ways, and the ones that do, mostly get it over with rather quickly. I will refrain from talking about Ashe until we are in the full spoiler section of the video, as she is the real protagonist here, and has the most character development. Likewise, the more interesting things worth saying about Balthier and Bash, beyond what we already know that is, aren't revealed until about the last third of the story, so they'll have to wait too. But the rest of the party, well, we already know most, if not everything we need to know about them. I actually find it hard to imagine there was a version of this story where Bash was the protagonist because, while he's kinda cool, once we know about Gabranth, that's all there is to either of them. In the Final Fantasy XII Scenario Ultimania, writer Miwa Shoda said, "We decided early on that the story shouldn't revolve solely around the protagonist. In Final Fantasy XII, we wanted to portray a world where multiple people's perspectives intersected. A story about many characters, not just one chosen person." This is one of the reasons we have Varn as our point of view character. While he does have a stake in the outcome of the main conflict, he could easily be switched out for any number of other people who we stumble across in the game. Also, Princess Ashe is only one of many people battling the Empire of Arcadia, albeit an important one. We meet numerous resistance cells and see other people, even characters from the Rosarian Empire, who are working towards thwarting the Arcadian advance. Likewise, this isn't a conflict that's going to be solved by simply defeating someone in a sword fight. An empire is a vast political machine, and while cutting off the head may cause some problems for a short time, the beast will eventually grow a new head, maybe even 2 or 3. But I feel this approach to the writing is also why we spend so much more time exploring the map than we do watching intense narrative set pieces in the game. While Ashe's quest is an important part of this particular story, in the grand scheme of things, it's just a fleeting moment in a much larger world, and most of that doesn't really care about our heroes or their conflict. So let's start with Vaughn and Penelo. Vaughn, especially, gets a lot of shade for being kind of annoying, and his nasally voice certainly is. But he's not such a bad kid, really. Vaughn actually lost his family in the plague that hit Rabanastre before the war, and had to move in with his friend Penelo and her family after that. When the war took Penelo's parents, Vaughn was left to look after himself and his adopted little sister, and you might notice that among the various orphans he associates with, he's actually quite a bit older. Vaughn learned from a young age that the world is unfair. While he lost his own family to a plague, he directly blames the Arcadians for his current situation and holds a special hatred for Basch because of what happened to his brother. As we already know, Rex didn't die at Nalbina Fortress, but was kept alive and dragged back to Rabanastre to testify about what he saw. Mortally wounded and mentally broken, Rex never recovered, and Vaughn just watched his brother slip away until nothing was left. This has left him bitter inside, and projecting a nonchalant front to the outside, with an almost self-destructive urge to strike back at the Empire somehow. Penelo seems to be his anchor at this stage in his life. She's the closest thing he has to a counterweight to stop him tipping off the edge. While Vaughn demonstrates camaraderie with the orphans in Rabanastre, he's quite willing to throw himself into the fire to protect her. Once he acquires the Dusk Shard, for example, he stands up to the likes of Balthier and braves considerable danger just to keep hold of it. But the moment Penelo's life is in danger, he doesn't think twice about giving it up for her, let alone rushing headlong into danger himself after her. Of course, we get a look at what's really going on inside Vaughn when he's finally face to face with the man he believes murdered his brother and sold out his entire country. But this righteous rage is brought to a grinding halt when we hear Bash's version of events. As absurd as it sounds though, Vaughn is actually brought around. When he's walking with Basch to meet Balthier and Fran, he opens up to him in a very mature way.
I am sorry.
You don't have to keep apologizing. Really, it's all right. I know it wasn't your fault. I see that now. You didn't kill my brother.
And that isn't even his boldest move. You see, the Lady Ashe is haunted by phantoms of her lost prince. While she might have thought at one point that they were just illusions, their clarity, especially in proximity to powerful magics like the Dawn Shard, have her thinking there's maybe more to it than that. And then there's the fact that Vaughn can see something too. At first, it seems like they saw the same apparition, but in a later conversation they have in a quiet moment together, things seem to have changed. You see, the journey they've been going on has started to shape our young street thief into something else entirely. He was an aimless wanderer, harboring deep resentment towards an authoritarian power that he felt helpless to do anything about at the start, and the apparition that he saw was apparently more like his brother than Lord Rassler. But now, through a series of coincidences and choices, here he is, fighting back. He's only a small piece in a much bigger game, but he's already grown so much and seen he's capable of far more than he realized. He's let go of his hatred for Basch, and there are even moments where Balthier shows a little respect for the guy. This is one of my favorite moments in the game. It's a real moment of vulnerability for Vaughn. He's admitting not only to Ashe, but to himself about his own shortcomings and mistakes, and making a choice to do better. To not hate the world for his circumstances, but to take it on and find his purpose, whatever it may be. And after that, he doesn't see apparitions of his brother anymore, which makes you wonder, what is Ashe seeing? That's not to say the young man still doesn't put his foot in his mouth every now and then.
Fran,
Yes?
I was wondering what Yote said, you know? About how you said the same thing 50 years ago?
Your point?
How old were you again?
Nice fun.
Surprisingly rude. Try to grow up, please.
I don't really have a lot to say about Penelo because she doesn't really contribute to the narrative in any particularly meaningful way. After she's reunited with Vaughn and the crew, she sticks around because that's kinda what these two do, I guess. However, I really appreciate one scene later on when the party is reunited with Larsa. At this point, Larsa reveals his gambit to try and get Lady Ashe legitimized as the Queen of Dalmasca and have her forge an alliance with Arcadia, disperse the resistance, and prevent Rosaria from invading everyone's lands and a massive war ensuing as a result. Ashe isn't exactly comfortable with this idea, but it's certainly better than all three nations finally going scorched earth on each other. Still, when she and Bash are looking for some kind of hope, they see Larsa, Penelo, and Vaughn walk past. Not an emperor's son and two homeless orphans from rival nations, but three kids, laughing and enjoying each other's company. A sign that no matter how different we might be on the outside, be it nation or culture, skin tone or how expensive our clothes are, deep down, we're all just people. And really, we all just want the same thing. The most we learn about Fran is when we visit the Eriut village in the Golmore jungle. Fran is aloof and speaks mostly in short, direct sentences. As a Viera, she seems to have an affinity for the mist and magic. We don't know a lot about how she and Balthea linked up and became partners, but they have a deep level of trust and respect for each other, and have clearly been through hell together. A single look shared between these two can communicate much, which, given the level of facial animations at the time, says a lot about the quality on display here. While traveling through the Golmore jungle to reach Mount Bur Omisase, the party encounters magical barriers and can't pass beyond. So Fran takes them on a little detour to Eriut village. This is a hidden village where she grew up, and she hopes they can get aid from the Viera here. When Penelo points out that her family will be happy to see her, she simply responds,
I am unwelcome, an unsought guest in their wood.
Oh my. What have we stepped into here? Eriut village is inhabited exclusively by female Viera who all wander around in what can best be described as negligees and high heels. Again, we are dealing with someone's very specific fetish here. The Viera are hostile towards outsiders, and more importantly, their culture demands that those who choose to leave their glade, like Fran did, do so forever. I'm getting very cult vibes here, but it's not something really explored in the lore available in the game. The glade is a sanctuary, a place where the Viera let the world and its dramas sail past them while they exist in peace and secrecy, and one of their kin leaving is something of a rare occurrence. Fran specifically wants the party to contact her sister, Mjörn, who she soon discovers isn't in the glade anymore. Mjörn became curious when the number of soldiers marching through the forest increased dramatically, and she decided to follow them, even leaving the Golmore jungle in the process. She was eventually captured by the Imperials and taken with them to the Henne mines. God damn do I hate this place. And not just the base mine, the secret shafts we can explore later are just some of the worst places to fight through in the whole damn game. When we finally find Mjörn, she is in a state not unlike what happened to Fran aboard the Leviathan, and she manages to rouse a beast sleeping in the mines. After a pretty epic boss fight though, we find manufactured nethicite on her person, and as it shatters, we get our first look at a sinister shape as it drifts away from the scene. While the team return triumphant, they're given a simple charm to pass through the barriers and told to leave as quickly as possible. Mjörn is scolded for leaving the forest, and when she expresses her desire to do so again, it's actually Fran who cuts her down. While Fran followed her heart into the wider world, she is worried about what will befall her younger sister were she to follow in her footsteps, especially at this dangerous time in Ivalice's life. She cuts her off and tells her not to think of her as her sister anymore. It's cold in many ways, but it seems to serve the purpose of keeping her sister relatively safe. I guess the best word I can use to describe Fran is pragmatic. She is someone who cuts straight to the heart of a problem and doesn't mess around with half measures. While we do have to return to Eriut Village for a few more side quests, and even encounter a few Viera out in the wider world, we never really interact with them any more than this. I suppose it's for the better. We are not a force of change in this game that has a profound effect on every person and culture we meet. And so while our adventure might feel like the most important thing in the world to us, to everyone else,
It was Tuesday.
So, we know a little of our story. We've met a few characters and learnt a bit about the world. So how exactly does this game play? Well, that's going to take some explaining. One of the biggest changes made to Final Fantasy XII for the Zodiac Edition was the introduction of job boards. In the original, there was a single unified job board that all of the characters could travel across and purchase skills from, meaning that, just like with Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid, you could have every character wielding every ability by the end of the game. However, the Zodiac Jobs system, first introduced in a Japanese-only special edition, transforms the one board into 12 boards, each geared towards speccing out a different character type. We'll dive into the licenses in a moment, but I just want to talk about the job boards for now. Early on in the game, you won't have a full party, and you'll only be able to give a single job to each character, and it's kind of intimidating starting out. But don't worry, you can switch out your job for another one by visiting Mont Blanc in the Hunters Guild, so you've got as much freedom to experiment as you want, though I'd experiment more earlier on in the game, because if you want to switch out a full license board later in the game, it is going to take a long time. I'd recommend getting a white mage in there at the start, especially if you're planning on trying out hunts before a secondary job becomes available. Some jobs are Final Fantasy staples like Black Mage or Knight, and some are pretty easy to intuit their roles based on their names. But like, what the hell is a Shikari? Or an Ulan? Wait a minute, what's green magic? Is that the same as blue magic? Yeah, the naming conventions and even the descriptions aren't very helpful. After a few hours of game though, once you've bagged your first Esper, you'll gain access to a second job for each character, and I think this is where the system really comes into its own. For some reason, I just assumed that each job could only be held by one character. It was something about the way their faces just pop into those little slots on the wheel that made me think, oh, this space is occupied. Which made me wonder about some of the high-level setups I was reading about that required all members to have access to mystic armor. I only figured out, much later on in the game, that you could in fact have multiple characters rocking the same job. But at that point, I'd already maxed out every license board, and there was no way I was respecking at that point, because man, what a drag that is. However, I'm glad I got a taste of what every job offers, and doing it this way spreads those skills out quite nicely. According to the devs, any pairing is technically viable, but there are definitely better and worse pairings. Some pairs synergize their weapons and abilities really well, while others will feel more combative, making you choose between the two jobs for potential equipment loadouts for your character. There are a few really important things you want to be aware of though. The first is, you must have one or all of these jobs maxed out in your party. The reason is remedies. Remedies are your go-to cure to remove any status abnormality that either you don't know about, as this game has several new ones, or doesn't have a spell or medicine specific to removing it. Or rather they are in literally every other Final Fantasy. For some reason though, the devs thought it was a really good idea to nerf these and then make you buy back their abilities on the job board. I cannot even begin to tell you how infuriating this was, especially because you can butt up against some of these more exotic statuses before you even have Asuna to remove them. Also, no, Asuna doesn't remove everything this time either. There were so many times that I tried to clear something with a remedy and it just didn't work, and then had to stop the game and go looking online for a way to remove this thing that I don't know anything about, so I could just get on with playing, and in some cases, I just reloaded my save to make the damn thing go away. Some of these even stick around after your character has been KO'd and resurrected. And no, I don't think this is clever or a move to add more challenge. This is just pissing your player off and laughing at them. It's cruel and it adds nothing to the game but frustration. And there is a huge difference between challenging a player and just being a dick. So basically, these are the jobs that have Remedy Level 3 to unlock, that restores remedies to their normal level of usefulness. Let that sink in. You aren't getting a better version of Remedy for your troubles, you're just getting one that does exactly what it does in all the other Final Fantasy games ever. So you need as many people as possible to have it to hand, so you never wind up in a party combination when no one can use it. Oh, and do your best to remember that it's these 3 jobs that have it, because after you've purchased it, there's nothing in the character stats that indicate that you have it. The only way you'd be able to find out would be to go rummaging through the license board until you found it again. Yeah, super helpful UI you've got here. You also don't want to pair up Black and White Mage. I know it seems like an obvious choice to make a Super Mage, but your White Mage will be far too busy casting heals in boss fights to really do anything else. And if you need them to blind or silence an enemy, and you will, a lot, you're going to need a backup healer on hand to keep the tank alive while your main White Mage is doing that, because even a well-equipped tank can lose their HP very quickly. Plus, again, the more you can spread out healing duty, the better it's going to be for your character MP overall. Now, personally, I just went online and found some recommended pairings and did that. But you want to try and use one job to address the weaknesses of the other. So, magic characters can usually only wear light armor and robes, but if you pair them with a job that can use medium or heavy armor, you've now got a mage that's not going to be taken out by a stray attack, or maybe even a healer who can tank in a pinch. Licenses are another thing that left me really torn. This really feels inspired by the sphere grid system from Final Fantasy X, which is great because that's one of my favourite character progression systems. It's an incredible dopamine drip and very satisfying to use. Designed to look like some kind of obscure game board, the check squares have a collection of symbols on them. Each symbol is a license you can pay for with license points, or LP. In exactly the same way, you can slot spheres into the sphere grid. Once you buy a license, you have access to whatever benefit it provides, and potential licenses on adjacent squares will become available. Unlike the sphere grid though, you're not locked into a mostly set path around it, and can spread out in any particular direction you want, and you'll generally find similar licenses to those you just bought by going in a particular direction. This gives the whole thing a wonderful treasure hunting vibe that leads you to try and hunt down veins of licenses on a board that will be useful to you now or in the near future, or those that seem to lead to the job's more exciting abilities and spells. Where it falls down though is when you realize that a lot of the licenses you buy probably aren't useful now, and might not even be useful at all in this playthrough. Let me explain. While there are power-ups that will immediately increase your HP and damage output the moment you buy them, a lot of licenses aren't so much power-ups as they are permissions. Licenses, one might say. This system was inspired by the judge enemies in the story. Since judges are arbiters of law, and law permits you to do some things and restricts you from doing others, it seemed like a cool way to add some storytelling to the mechanics. So, to use a certain piece of equipment or a spell, you need a specific license to do so. But then, you've still got to actually go out into the world and find it. This sort of works at the beginning of the game. When you have just one license board per character, and you're buying licenses for early game items, you get that sense of reward when you roll into a shop and realize that you can use the items and spells that are sold there. Like, wow man, I'm so glad I made these choices because now my party is stronger for having done so. The issues arise later in the game, when you're buying licenses for the most powerful weapons, armor, and abilities. You feel like, oh cool, I just bought Flare and Ribbon, those are super useful, and I got those licenses kinda early, so I'll get to enjoy their benefits for a longer period of time. So you arrive in a new location, and you rush off to the store hoping to buy those wondrous things, only to discover that they're not there. After a couple of times of this happening, you decide to check out where these powers are located, and it turns out they're hidden in obscure chests in late game dungeons that you'll have no chance of accessing until you're in the endgame anyway, leaving you feeling like you've been screwed. Character special abilities can fit into two broad categories, those being magic and techniques. Magic can be further subdivided into several other categories that can be wielded by certain jobs, but techniques are what give your more physical-based characters a little more to do in battle than just smash things and tank hits. There are multiple powerful skills that can notably weaken an enemy's defenses and resistances to various kinds of attack. Think Auron's break abilities in Final Fantasy X. You'll usually find a few new spells to play with in the shops of each town that you visit, with only the most powerful and exotic ones being confined to chests located in dangerous dungeons or found as rewards for defeating certain powerful enemies. Techniques though, you can buy like 5 in the entire game, and the rest are out there for you to find somewhere. And when I mean somewhere, I mean a random chest in some obtuse map that only has a 20% chance of spawning and may not even have the thing you want in it when it does. Or to put it another way, MMORPG bullshit. This is something that is objectively unfair. What do I mean by unfair? I mean it's not something you can figure out simply by playing the game by yourself. And get used to me describing stuff this way, because there is so much of it. If you roll through a location and hit every chest you find, but that one chest that has a rare spell doesn't spawn, you have absolutely no reason to think it was even there. In an MMORPG at least, there is a massive community of people who are all chipping away at the same problem and keeping each other updated on the situation. And while I still think random spawns and drops are just lazy ways for developers to make you replay entire sections of these games, I can at least figure out what they're doing here. But in a single player game, it feels like you're being forced to buy the guide just so certain jobs and builds can be viable. That aside though, this just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you want to gatekeep powerful abilities by placing them in late game locations like Final Fantasies VII, VIII, and IX do, that's fine. If you want to lock them behind level progression like X does, also cool. But once you combine the two, you're just adding layers of complexity that actually subtract from the player's overall satisfaction. Aside from those immediately useful power-ups that increase attack power or magic, I basically stopped caring about what I was buying on here. I just moved along the board picking up whatever I could afford and trying to fill out spaces, occasionally tracking down a miss power or slotting a new Esper into my arsenal. When multiclassing, your secondary job will be a mess. This is because things like accessory licenses only need to be purchased once, meaning they'll automatically be bought on the secondary board, and the licenses surrounding them will have become visible. The trick here is to decide which job board has the weapons and armor you want, and basically ignore them on the other one until you've got all the important powers and abilities from each class, and you're just mopping up the dregs to get that nice clean finished look at the end. The 3 drips you're on when playing Final Fantasy are experience points, some kind of ability points, in this case license points, and gil. You may wonder why I'm bringing this up since it's such a common feature of every game in the series, but gil this time is a big limiter, for the first 50% of the game for sure. When you're buying weapons, armor, magic, and the occasional technique in a store, you're going to be running out of gil quite a lot, and may even need to revisit a few dungeons to do a little treasure hunting. You don't get gil just from smashing up enemies this time. Instead, you harvest loot from their bodies, which you can sell at a vendor to help fill your own purse. When battling enemies, you'll actually notice this little chain count go up down in the corner of the screen. Chains were introduced in Final Fantasy XI as a way to incrementally increase the amount of XP you got per battle against much stronger enemies. An efficient party that was pulling in and defeating challenging enemies at a good pace could rack up a good multiplier and level up faster as a reward for good teamwork. In this game, the chains are for defeating enemies of the same type. Getting it high enough will lead to them dropping more and better loot, but the moment you defeat an enemy of a different variety, the chain breaks and you have to start again. If you are just playing the game and moving from point A to point B to get things done, there are some areas where this will just happen organically, but in most places, you'll never move too far without butting up against an enemy that will aggro to you and cause you to break your chain. It's better overall to clear a specific area of a map inhabited by certain enemy types, and then zone out and back to get them to respawn. This is actually where one of the game's big side hustles, monster hunting, comes into play. Not so much because the rewards of those quests are especially good, because they really aren't, but because it's the biggest incentive to, organically, return to areas and dungeons you're overleveled for, fight your way through all those enemies again, and harvest all their loot so you can flog it and pick up the things in town you couldn't afford the first time you were there. Since we're talking about selling though, let's bring up the bazaar. The bazaar is the last option in the store's menu. It's a kind of crafting store. Basically, when you sell certain loot or certain combinations of loot, you'll unlock new items for sale here. The bazaar is universal to all stores in Ivalice. That is to say, if you open the bazaar in any store, it'll have the same stuff. So you don't have to sell specific things to every merchant in the land. On the surface, it seems like a fun mechanic. As you cross the world and fight more and more variations of the same wolf and bat model, you'll collect a larger variety of items and start selling them on. This will see more mysteriously named items show up in the bazaar, and you'll kind of gamble on their usefulness. These can be anything from a selection of potions and tonics, to some of the best weapons and armor in the game. It's a nice idea, and it's always kind of exciting when new stuff shows up in there. You can unlock items like monographs that cause certain enemies to drop new items, and also the canopic jar that causes them to drop arcanas. Arcanas do something. I have no idea. You just sell them at the bazaar, so that really didn't feel like a worthwhile investment. While I enjoyed this feature for a while, and got a little kick out of it every time something new came up for sale, often I was already too strong to appreciate the weapons and armor it would give me, and despite having travelled the length and breadth of this map, plundered the depths of every optional dungeon multiple times, and killed just about every monster in the game now, there are things I haven't unlocked on here, and I have no idea how I'm supposed to do it. Aside from a few hints hidden inside the clan primer, assuming you actually open that thing to read all the optional lore, I never encountered anyone in the game who could tell me either what I might be able to unlock, or how I go about doing it, and were I to unlock something in the bazaar, it would happen after I've sold so much stuff that I'd have no idea which things had done the unlocking. Also, they really need a sell all option in this menu. Such a drag going up this list. As such, we see one of many examples of elite level items being gated behind a system so obtuse and unfair that you need some kind of guide. Told you this was going to come up a lot. Whether that means having a browser open on a second monitor, or I assume, more preferably for Square, you buy an official strategy guide, you're going to be resorting to external resources to get all the best stuff. And I just don't think that's good game design at all. Why would you want your players tabbing out of their game or flipping through a book to get an answer? Why don't you put it somewhere in the game where you can get a real sense of achievement for figuring it out all by yourself? What's the point in being obtuse just for the sake of it? Along with the aforementioned MMORPG mechanics for item spawns, stuff like this means the game has a big problem with making you feel rewarded and satisfied for doing anything in it at all. Buy a cool license? Okay, but I still need to find or buy the item first to appreciate it. Go to a dangerous dungeon looking for a rare item? Oh, it didn't spawn. I guess I'd better keep reloading my save and trying again until the RNG goes my way. Defeat a powerful boss and get a cool drop? Oh, it's just a loot item, and maybe create something in the bazaar? But I don't know what else I need to sell there to get it to produce the item I need. Hell, even most of the espers you collect are completely useless by the time you acquire them, as suitably powerful enemies can destroy them very quickly, and render their assistance useless in battle. The most egregious example of this, in my mind at least, and probably the thing that made me want to write this, was the Hellwim. This is one of two very powerful and optional dragons you can battle in the late game, and, according to a guide I was following, there's also a very powerful shield in his lair. Now, of course, I was going after this guy anyway, and you might argue that playing the game is the real reward. But part of playing the game is getting those rewards for overcoming those insurmountable enemies. Yeah, that chest with that shield? 1% chance of spawning. And why? Anyone who knows it's there and wants it bad enough will just exit and enter the room until it pops. These mechanics don't add anything to the game but frustration and time wasting. Surely the point of having all this cool stuff in the game is so that players can enjoy using it. I found a total of 2 ribbons in my entire playthrough, and by that point there was only the fight with Yasmat left for me to take on, and you don't really need them for that. Whereas earlier in the game, there were numerous bosses and trash mobs that I would have killed to have just 1 ribbon available to help me with.
Oh, but Arkham, you just need to go into the challenge mode and game the system too.
I'm not interested in playing that mode. And if your answer to the problem is use exploits, then you're just proving my point that there's something wrong with how the game handles all this stuff. What is the point of gating off the game's most powerful sword behind defeating its most powerful boss? What am I going to use it on now when I can one-shot every enemy in the game with the weapons I currently have? Oh, there's a new game plus? Great. Do I keep all my stuff? No. Well then, what's this even for? Getting back to buying and selling though, I actually think it's good that you have to wrestle with those big spending decisions at low levels when you're barely scraping through each dungeon. Do you prioritize physical or magical? Do we need more offense or defense right now? Are these weapons and armor only available here, or will they be in the next town over too? Actually, I really need more Phoenix Downs and medicine after that last dungeon. So when you reach a point where you no longer have to worry about that, you feel like you've achieved something, that you're stronger and better, like money somehow solved all your problems. Wait, no. I mean like having enough money to take care of your needs, and a little left over for your wants, is all it really takes to be satisfied and allow you to focus on other aspects of personal growth. Yeah, that'll do. You can load out your character with a weapon, of course, something in their offhand if the weapon isn't two-handed, so ammunition if you have a ranged weapon, and a shield if you have a single-handed melee weapon, a piece of armor, and an accessory. Armor, as you can expect, will bolster your defense in various ways, and while you'll be selling a lot of your old pieces to trade up to newer ones, you want to keep hold of anything that allows you to absorb any kind of elemental damage, simply because in high-level fights, that can be a real game changer. Accessories are on another level in this game too. While they can help with increased damage or better stealing, their primary use is in either giving beneficial or preventing negative status effects. Bubble belts, for example, give a permanent bubble status which doubles the target's HP, and these are very important in fights with powerful enemies. However, you'll spend most of your time swapping out accessories to block any kind of incapacitating debuff. These can be anything like sleep, confuse, or stop that we know about from other games already, sap, which is just another version of poison that you can't remove with an antidote, or disease, which slowly lowers your max HP until it's removed. So if your character is KO'd and rezzed, they'll only have 1 HP until the status is lifted. Oh, and remember I said that the serums that remove this are only available in a shop on one of the ships that flies you between cities. Oh, and they're really expensive. Oh, and the cleanse spell you can use to remove them is also difficult to get. Yeah, fuck disease. Where was I? Oh yeah, accessories. Very important. You'll use them a lot, and they're worth dumping your gil on 3 of each of them. So let's head all the way back to that first shot of the video and see if we can't answer the big question that was asked there.
What the hell was that?
The solution to the problem of seamless battles was labeled Active Dimensional Battle, or ADB for short. They really wanted to use the D so it sounded kinda like T. This really isn't all that different from the regular active time battle on the surface. I mean, here's your timer, and here's your menu. And the only thing that's really changed is that rather than waiting for the timer to fill, choosing your action and then it happening, you choose your action first, then the timer fills, and then you perform the action. The main difference is the overall speed of the combat, which is a lot closer to classic CRPG real-time with active pause fights. One thing to be aware of is that your character's positioning matters this time, as area of effect spells for both healing and damage have a circle of influence, and anyone or thing outside of that circle won't be hit by the effect. This also works for things like breath attacks that have a cone of damage. You can move characters you don't want in range off to the side or behind an enemy, but I will say, they aren't very good at staying put. One thing this mode really is missing is a Dragon Age style tactical view and the ability to command characters to move to certain positions without manually taking control of them. So we're out in the monster-infested wilds, and yes, once again, there are so many monsters in this world that I can't even begin to imagine how anyone moves from point A to point B without being a super badass warrior. Your battle may draw the attention of other creatures that happen to be wandering nearby. This could mean that a battle with one enemy could quickly turn into one with 2, 3, or a lot more if you're not careful, and enemies who are of the same type will back each other up if they see one of their own getting jumped. There are also non-hostile creatures that can just be running by near the fight, who can get caught in an area of effect damage spell and turn hostile. If that sounds like trouble, well, it is. But it's actually quite difficult to get a full party wipe in this game. I mean, it can happen if you're pitted against a particularly powerful boss, or if you show up to a fight unprepared and get your entire party disabled, confused, or stopped. But even then, you can switch members in and out, not exactly at will, but when they're not being targeted by either an enemy or an ally, you can restructure your party entirely and have fresh members resurrect your KO'd members, or clear out statuses from members who are otherwise incapacitated. While you're in the menu taking care of this, you can even dip into each character's equipment and switch it out mid-battle. So if your knight is wielding a greatsword and is really struggling to tank hits from an enemy, you can switch him to sword and shield and help take some of the strain off your healer. And more importantly, you can also swap out accessories. As mentioned earlier, status effects play a huge role in combat, working both for and against you. You'll be firing off blind, silence, and slow all a lot throughout this game. But you'll also be getting hit with much worse coming back at you. Let's use an example to show the usefulness of accessories. Fafnir is one of Final Fantasy's iconic monsters, who first appeared in 6, and he's kind of a dick to deal with here. Not only does he hit like a bulldozer, but his breath attack can cause stop, and he can also silence and sleep the whole party. Since with the exception of ribbons, which are insanely difficult to get, you can only ever block one status at a time, you want one member immune to stop, one member immune to sleep, and one member immune to silence, and basically have them ready to clear out the statuses on the other two as quickly as possible, so that your healer can get back to keeping your tank alive. That's just one example, but long-term Final Fantasy fans will no doubt be aware of the legendarily broken Marlboro Bad Breath ability, that basically inflicts every status on you at once. And make no mistake, there's a lot of them in this game, so you need to be prepared. So, you initiate the battle, or the battle gets initiated on you, pull out your weapons, open your menu, cycle through your characters, select a spell, ability, or attack from your list for each of them, and the carnage commences. But because of the pace of these battles, it would be incredibly difficult to micromanage every action that everyone in the team performs, especially on those tougher boss fights, where your tank's HP is getting hammered and your healer's getting silenced or put to sleep. You could panic react and handle it all yourself, or you could set up some gambits. I'm not kidding when I say your mileage with this system, and as such what you get out of the game overall, will greatly depend on how well you connect with the gambit system. It's something that at once seems so simple that you can't imagine why this wasn't a part of every CRPG that was using active pause combat, and is also deeply complex to the point of seeming absurdly convoluted. That being said, while I think playing this game without it is the kind of testicular torture that only the most masochistic of challenge runners would inflict upon themselves, you only have to engage with it up to a point. Gambits are AI commands that you slot into your party members, but rather than simply being something you set up in the UI, they've been actively integrated into the development of the characters via their license boards, and also require you to purchase commands from vendors in the world to broaden their usefulness. Ito said that he was somewhat inspired by NFL playbooks for the system. He likes how there is an initial strategy set up, followed by a series of reactions depending on certain circumstances. It's a way to bring a kind of order to chaos. Rather than a situation arising and you having to react quickly to it, you've already made a plan and practiced it so many times that you know without thinking what all the members of your team are doing and where they're going to be in a given moment. This allows you to dedicate your conscious attention to higher order things and events unique to this particular situation. Let's go through exactly how the system works, and then we can ponder how that makes us feel. From the main menu, we can jump into the Gambits tab, and we'll see that every character comes with a couple preloaded and set up. It's also worth looking at the setups of temporary party members for some guides on how to create a good loadout. For a Gambit to work, it needs 3 things: a target, a condition, and an action. From a programming standpoint, it's just an if statement. If this happens, then do this. That's it. It really couldn't be simpler. We can purchase a whole host of potential conditions in various shops around the world, and while there's an absolute buttload of these things, you certainly aren't going to need all of them, and they're relatively cheap compared to everything else. I'd say in the early game, you want to buy conditions that cover having low HP and MP, and conditions for the various status effects, either hitting self or party members. That being said, there are numerous enemy conditions that I never once used, or could even envision a situation where they might be used. Since this is very basic scripting, the list is always read from the top down. So you want your specific conditions, like what to do when a player has low health, all the way up at the top, and your more general conditions, like what to do if an enemy is in combat range, near the bottom. Also, you want to keep healing as a higher priority than buffing. Since your white mage is responsible for both heals and protects, you really don't want them casting a protect spell on someone when the party is desperately in need of a heal. However, even if, like me, you were using all of the jobs, there's enough white magic handed out in the game that you can always have a secondary healer in the group for emergencies. At the start of the game, just having a Gambit to take care of healing for you is a godsend. It's much harder to keep track of where everyone is and what condition they're in here with the camera pushed up behind the characters, versus seeing them all lined up on one side of the screen together. Because inflicting and receiving statuses is a much bigger deal in this game than in previous entries, you're going to be popping a lot of medicines or casting a Shuna. So again, it's good to have someone in each group assigned to quickly clearing them from the party members, or have them all responsible for taking care of themselves. Since most areas feature a lot of the same monster type, it's often better to jump into your Gambits and set up someone to use the medicine for certain effects if your enemy hits you with it, versus going into the regular combat menu and manually popping the medicine yourself. You won't have a lot of Gambit slots per character at the start of the game, meaning you'll be doing a lot of micromanaging for all your party members for a while. However, as you unlock more slots and buy more conditions, you can set your characters up to react a lot more. There's just something so satisfying about having a mob hit your big hitter with a blind spell, and less than a second later, having one of your allies hit them with some eye drops without even clicking a button. This goes double for any kind of AoE status attack. Everyone just clears out the issue, and we all move on. Then there's buffs. You can have your time mage keep an eye on your white mage, and have them use haste every time it wears off, or cast it when an enemy hits them with slow. That way, you'll always be on top of the healing game. If you use Libra to give you information on enemy weaknesses, you can have your black mage all set up to exploit them without commanding them to. If you're thinking this is heading down the road of turning the game into an auto-battler, well, kinda, but also kinda not. Gambits can help take a lot of the grind out of the grind. Since monster hunting and Esper collecting will see you zigzagging back and forth through areas you visited previously, setting the correct gambits, and then hitting up the speed up play button is as close as you can get to having a no encounter ability here. You'll basically be rushing through all these waves of enemies who gave you such a hard time on your first visit, and one or two shotting them with your better weapons and higher level characters, while quickly clearing out any negative statuses they might try to inflict on you. There's something quite satisfying to seeing this happen, especially in dungeons that gave you a really hard time on your first visit, and you'll also harvest a ton of loot and LP to continue buffing your characters. That being said, you'll never be able to account for every possible situation. I've taken down all of this game's most challenging enemies at this point, and while a good equipment loadout and gambit setup will take a huge amount of work out of the trial, there's always going to be those ball-squeezing moments where you have to react quickly. Maybe I'm just not as good with this system as I should be, but when you've got a big hitter like Behemoth King chain attacking your tank for absurd damage per hit, even if they've got a banger of a shield to protect them, you're going to need that secondary healer to take up the slack. But as long as casting Decoy to keep the hate on the tank and Bubble to keep their HP doubled is taken care of by gambits, you don't have to stress about that and can focus on things specific to this fight that need your attention. On that note, since it's come up a few times, let's dive into a few cool and not so cool things the game does with statuses. I've already expressed my annoyance at the introduction of several new statuses and unnecessary limitations placed on remedies for countering these. But don't go thinking every new twist that this game implements is there to metaphorically kick you in the nethers.
Would you please leave my testicles alone?
There are some great new spells that can flip the script, quite literally in one case, in any situation, and my only regret is that I didn't explore the utility of these spells earlier. Reverse is an excellent example here. Introduced as one of the green magic spells, it reverses the effects of everything. So damage becomes healing, cures inflict harm, etc. It's introduced as a spell that targets enemies by default, and if your gambits are set up correctly or just switched off so the characters don't attack the target, there can be some utility here. But where it really shines through is when you target your own characters with it. If an enemy has hit you with it out in the field, then your gambits will work against you, as the moment your healer gets the cue to fire off their cure spell, they are effectively going to yeet the characters who've had reverse played on them. Ultima uses this strategy very well. But if you know it's coming, or even plan to exploit it, well, that's a different story. I honestly tanked my way through so many big hitters without using this, and man was I playing on hard mode doing so, because you can literally have the enemy heal your tank by using Decoy to keep all the attention on them, and reverse to just turn damage into healing. The only thing you have to do here is use targeted healing spells for other characters, or have people take care of their own healing with potions in the event they get damaged, rather than have the healer use an AoE healing spell. It's not a be-all and end-all bulletproof method, but damn is it a good one, and I love that it was included, and we were just left to figure it out. That's a Larian level move right there in terms of being able to exploit the systems. Bubble is another staple, especially if you're fighting an enemy many levels higher than you. Bubble belts can be found in the shops or out in the wild too. When cast or equipped, they double your HP. This can be very good if you're using Decoy to create a tank and not using a reverse gambit. The problem, as we've already talked about though, is that you only get one accessory per character, and bubble belts can't protect against status attacks. A shield with good magic resistance will help, and of course, having characters ready to clear out confuse or disable on their allies the moment it hits helps a lot. But there are plenty of enemies that have attacks that inflict multiple negative status effects in one go, leaving you confused, asleep and disabled, and completely incapable of reacting regardless of what your gambits want you to do. So having it as a spell that you can cast on your tank is often the better option. I've mentioned Decoy a few times already. This is basically the provoke ability that most warrior class characters have in MMORPGs. It just means the enemy will always be looking at them rather than going after your healer. The difference is that rather than being a technique linked to the job's owner, it's a spell that can be cast on anyone. It's also one of the only positive status effects that doesn't always stick for some reason. I can only assume that this was another dick move on behalf of the developers. You'll sometimes have to cast the spell 4 or 5 times before you can get a hit. and during that time, the mob will be assaulting more vulnerable members and taxing your healer. Again, this is just shitty. If you feel the spell is too useful, then you need smarter enemies, not limitations that don't apply to any other spell in the game. But one of those requires more thinking and development time than the other. Unfortunately, while statuses both positive and negative feature much more heavily here, and can be incredibly useful, the developers continue Final Fantasy's long-standing tradition of having enemies, especially boss enemies, who can just say no to most if not all of them. This is something I've always taken an issue with in this series. Spells like Gravager seem like a really great idea on paper, but then you cast them and most of the time, the enemy is immune. This is especially frustrating given that there's a whole Esper whose thing is gravity magic, so summoning him is pretty much useless. Of course, it makes sense that some enemies will have affinities and resistances to certain abilities or spells, but the amount of spells and techniques that basically feel useless given the incredibly small amount of situations where they can be used effectively is pretty overwhelming. I get that you don't want us to cast death on a boss and get a one-hit kill. Well, maybe just don't give us that kind of power to begin with. You may as well not for how ineffective the spell is most of the time anyway. Generally, the only time a spell like death is consistently useful is when we're so much more powerful than the target that a single hit from a regular weapon would do the same job faster. But instead of saying, no, Gravager doesn't work here, just factor the monster's magic resistance into the hit and damage equation. That way, a player who's taken the time to build a character that's effective at using those abilities gets to benefit from it. By becoming very specialized, they'll be weaker in other areas to balance it, and then the spell won't feel like it's just taking up space on a menu for no reason. Just like in other Final Fantasy games, when your back is against the wall, it's time to bust out the big guns, and that means summons and limit breaks. Or in this case, it means using the mist powers. As your characters progress along their license boards, they'll eventually encounter mist attacks that work similar to other limit break style powers. Basically, they're on a charge that builds up as you battle, or they get a full refresh at each save crystal. Choosing to use this power will begin an attack chain, and you won't get any kind of tutorial about how this works. It's somewhere in the Clan Primer maybe, but who the hell reads in this age? To get the most out of these, you'll need multiple characters with mist charges, and since you can unlock 3 mist abilities, you'll eventually get 3 charges each. When you launch into a mist attack, during part of the animation, there'll be a timer ticking down that gives you a few seconds to decide who's going to blow their charge and release their powers next. Blow and release. You can do this multiple times until no one is available to attack. Then you need to shuffle. What you're doing here is you're looking for someone to gain the action Mist Charge, which, once used, will open up yet more attacks and allow you to keep the chain ticking along nicely. I don't know if there's any special tactics you can use to help you get those level 3 attacks over the others. There really isn't enough time during the chain to try and figure that out. You basically just want to chain as many attacks together as possible to rack up massive damage on an enemy or group of enemies. It's especially useful on hunts, where the monster will often bust out some shitty tactic like doubling their level when they're down to 10% health, and try to wipe your party before the last blow can be struck. If you can get a good chain here, you may just be able to kill them outright and not have to think about that. I think my only grievances here are, first of all, we can't skip the animations, or at the very least get shorter versions of them. After a while it starts to get annoying and makes you less willing to use the feature unless you really feel you have to. Second, we don't get a move-by-move update on the damage we're dealing out. Instead, we get it all dropped on the enemy after the final attack is landed, and I feel this lessens the overall excitement of seeing these big powers pop off. It's nice to get that instant feedback and feel like you're being rewarded for your choices with those big numbers flashing up on the screen. So, onto Espers. In the heart of King Wraithwall's tomb, where we go to find the Dawn Shard, we encounter Belias the Gigas. This is the first of 13 powerful creatures we can battle and recruit into our arsenal. Unlike Final Fantasy X, where the Aeons were an integral part of the story, and all but a few were recruited simply by progressing along the critical path, you won't get to see even half of the Espers in action if you aren't searching high and low off the beaten path to recruit them. I like this if I'm being honest. Final Fantasy VIII, 9, and 10 place their summoners and summon monsters at the heart of their drama and systems, but here they're only tangentially linked into the story. Yes, they have a mythology of their own and a reason for being where they are, but they are just out in the world minding their own business, and it's us who drags them into our problems. They also aren't our usual collection of demons and dragons either. Rather, they are creatures specific to this world, and if you played Final Fantasy Tactics, you've probably locked horns with a few of these guys already. Once acquired, we'll have to buy the license to use the Esper on the board. Only one member can do this per Esper, and doing so will actually open up a couple of locked off spaces behind it and give you access to extra licenses, ones that wouldn't necessarily be available on that board through any other means. After that, you can summon them in and, well, you aren't going to be doing it very often, that's for sure. Just like in 10, rather than being a big flashy attack spell, a summon is going to hang around and fight alongside you for a while. The problem though, is that the other two characters will be removed from the party, meaning the summoner and the Esper are the only two targets on the field. So your summoner could very quickly find themselves surrounded and overwhelmed if they aren't careful. With good planning, however, you can bring in an Esper and use the decoy spell to keep all the monsters' hate on it, or just send it far enough ahead of the summoner to start smashing up mobs and getting all the attention before coming up behind it. Most Espers can heal themselves and the summoner. They have their own set of gambits that can't be changed though, and really just need to be left alone to obliterate things. At any time during the fight, you can go into their techniques and have them fire off their ultimate AoE attack, or, when the timer is up and it's time for them to go, they'll leave with a big bang regardless. It's basically the system they refined for Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. All of the attacks are as spectacular as usual, but in terms of damage output, they aren't anything to write home about. They're a useful tool for clearing out enemy adds and trash mobs so you can focus on a powerful boss, and don't have much utility beyond that. They don't have the HP that's really needed to trade blows with a big hitter, and since they often have to manage their own healing as well as fighting, they can easily become overwhelmed. Their overall damage output isn't on a scale with a good mist chain either, which means they aren't really worth sacrificing your mist gauges for. One place they are useful is in any area with a lot of Marlborough-style enemies. Since 12 wants to throw these things at you constantly, and it can be such a pain clearing out all the cloying breath effects, an Esper can be really helpful here, as they're immune to all negative status effects, and can hit regular enemies like a truck. This can save you quite a lot of money on medicines in the long run. They look cool, they're a great challenge to hunt down, and bringing them into battle now and then is a fun little diversion. But they aren't an essential part of any Monster Hunter's arsenal. If you've listened to all that, and you developed a massive headache and asked yourself, who could ever possibly find this fun? Well then this really isn't the game for you, I'm sorry. But thanks for sticking around this long anyway. I will say that dissecting it like this isn't the best way to experience it. Like all great progressive systems, it's the final form that really matters, how all the parts come together to create the total experience, and how that experience makes you feel as a player. Had the game not had gambits, and had I been required to micromanage every moment on the battlefield, I would have quit long before I got to the end. But I won't lie, when I looked at the system for the first time, my eyes glazed over, and I hoped to all gods I could get away with using it as minimally as possible. And to be honest, even though I grew to love gambits, I still probably aren't exploiting it to its maximum potential. I see guides from absurdly good players with all the best equipment and gambits, who can play the game's biggest battles at high speed, like it's an auto-battler smartphone game. But honestly, I've seen setups that feel the same in all Final Fantasy games. For me, I found the correct balance of having most of my basic strategy being handled by gambits, while I reacted to those unexpected moments. Sometimes things would just go south and someone would die. I had Penelo ready with a rise to bring them back into the battle by the end of the game, but sometimes I'd have to choose between a Phoenix down and a cure, or just bringing in another member. Sometimes I'd just have to completely change my equipment, and set up new gambits mid-battle, to account for a status attack that I hadn't prepared for. Or maybe I'd need a member to target ad spawns rather than the main mob. Or I'd need a weapon with a specific type of damage to get the job done effectively. I only ever felt like I was auto-battling when I was wading through those trash mobs in dungeons I was revisiting, and since I was just getting from point A to point B, none of that felt like a problem. So hands down, the combat works and is great. Well, about half the time anyway. Were this game of similar size and pacing to 7 through 10, I think the combat would be just fine here. But unfortunately, it's not. You spend much more time walking across the world map and exploring monster-infested dungeons in 12 than you do in any of these games, and the rate of encounters is far higher here than it is there. Sometimes absurdly so. What this means is, when you have 2 sessions in a row where you're just marching between save points on the world map and killing everything along the way, well, the first night might be fun, as you experiment with any recently acquired equipment and spells, play around with your gambits and test the water against enemies unique to this area. The next, however... Oh, we're doing more of this, huh? Boy, this trip sure is taking a long time, and my medicines are getting kinda low now. The journey to Arcades is particularly obnoxious for how far it makes you trek, with only a couple of random NPCs to interact with, and just miles upon miles of fights to deal with. It almost felt like I was playing a Ubisoft open world at that point. Even in a single session, my engagement could go from high to crashing out, as what started as an interesting dungeon devolved into hours of senseless head crushing and occasionally purchasing some licenses to break up the pace. The combat, while good, just isn't good enough to stay interesting to the sheer volume of battles you have to fight. Hell, I doubt even original ATB combat would fix that either. You know what might have been more interesting though? Yeah. I'm not joking. I was really thinking that at some points in the game. If you've watched any of my other Final Fantasy content and have a feel for the structure I use, then you might be expecting a section on secrets and side quests right about now. And that is kind of what we're about to get into here, but you may have realized that Final Fantasy XII, well, she's not like other girls. She's built very differently. You see, despite what we talked about in the sections on the setup and characters, this isn't a game about a princess, a knight, and a sky pirate trying to find ancient artifacts to stop the machinations of an empire and a mad scientist. That's just dressing. What this game is actually about is a group of aspiring monster hunters who come together and join the clan of hunters in Rabanastre, travel the world, taking up every contract they can find, build up their experience, gear, and reputation, lasso 13 demonic entities into their service, and ultimately stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful dragon in the world. It's the political stuff that's the side hustle. You might think I'm being hyperbolic here, but I'm not. Of the over 100 hours I have invested into this playthrough, I am confident beyond all reason that less than half of that was spent engaged with the game's story in any way. Certainly, there are crossover points where, in the process of traveling to somewhere for the story, I encountered one, or even multiple hunt targets, but the amount of backtracking and busy work, grinding endless trash mobs, consulting guides and optimizing my party that I did, and the sheer amount of dungeons and items I would never have seen had I skipped this part of the game, well, this video would have gotten to you a lot sooner. Let's just say that much.
Oh, come on, Arkham. By that logic, 10 could be the story of an underdog blitzball team rising to become world champions, whose captain happens to help out the summoner protagonist of another story from time to time. And what about 8? Is that just the tale of some moody gambling addict trying to fill the emptiness in his soul by collecting what passes for Pokemon cards in that world? Oh, he just happens to date a sorceress? Well, you can run with whatever headcanon you want, but hopefully, you can see how silly that would sound. All those games are really invested in their stories, and use them to reveal their world and characters. But not 12. 12 is a game of wall-to-wall content, and it's that content that reveals the hidden depths and intricacies of the world, and also plays really well with what the writers wanted to convey with their story this time. This game isn't exactly about the hero who saves the world. Yes, Ash's quest is an important part of a conflict between 3 nations, but she's one piece in a much larger game that's being played by much larger powers, and by engaging with Esper and clan hunts, we see that this is a world filled with older and far more dangerous things than the Empire and its judges. Things for whom this whole drama is entirely insignificant. Okay, Arcadia's got armies and magitech, but there are things in this world with power equal to the very forces of nature themselves.
Things so old that they've seen empires rise and fall in the past, and they'll see it all again before they're done. And you'd best believe that Arcadia, Dalmasca, and the entire human species exist in this world at their sufferance. So why don't we do the only responsible thing any would-be Final Fantasy protagonist team can do? Let's go kick the proverbial hornet's nest. It all begins with a tomato. No, seriously. During the early story events, in the build-up to Vane's arrival, a lot of merchants and goods are coming into Rabanastre for the festivities. Unfortunately, it seems that this little guy has been terrorizing some of these incoming carts and becoming something of a problem. Who could stop such a fiend, you might ask? The Imperial Army, perhaps? An experienced member of the Hunters clan, maybe? No, not at all. A challenge this big can only rest on the shoulders of a street thief who sometimes fights rats in the sewer. This twist of fate sees us introduced to a procedure that we're going to become all too familiar with as we hunt down the 45 targets we have to deal with around this country. First, we have to get a bill. These can be posted in taverns or on bulletin boards, or received from the head of the Hunters clan, Mont Blanc himself. However, once we've got the bill, we first have to track down the petitioner and let them know we're taking on the challenge if we want to get paid at the end of it. We can track the location of the petitioner and their marks through the clan primer. This little thing lets us review our contracts and check on the map where we need to go. While this is a nice compromise between no guidance at all and a million objective markers on the screen, it needed to be a little more efficient. The hallmark of good UI is that everything the player could possibly want should be within 2, maybe 3 button presses tops, and the primer is anything but that. You've got to open it, go to the Hunts tab, scroll through all your finished hunts to find the ones that are active, open their entry, then press another button to open the map and reveal their location. It's not deal-breaking by any stretch, but it's poorly designed, and I don't see any reason that the markers couldn't have been on the in-game map at all times. So not long after turning his first mark into the second most overrated condiment there is, we'll be rolling into the hall of Clan Centurio, where we'll start getting hunts from their guildmaster, Mont Blanc himself. The problem with a lot of hunts is knowing when exactly you should be taking them on. The unfortunate truth of the matter is, your only real option is to fuck around and find out for yourself. This isn't a complaint exactly. While I think it's better to give curious or observant players a chance to figure things out ahead of time, this is a perfectly valid game dev tactic, as you can access all the information you need on a situation without having to resort to an external resource. You just fuck around, and then you find the fuck out. But given how much travel and wading through endless hordes of enemies some of these hunts entail, it would be nice to have some idea ahead of time if I'm going to stand a chance when I get there. You don't receive the hunts in the list order, and that order doesn't represent their difficulty in any way as far as I can tell. Ixion is a cakewalk compared to Behemoth King, and he's further down the list. The hunts do have ranks, but that's the biggest hint you'll get. From there, it's about going to their location and seeing what happens. Sometimes you'll be underleveled for the area, though that doesn't mean you can't handle the monster, as a one-on-one fight is usually much easier to manage and grind out than a lot of enemies ganging up on you. But if you're getting yeeted constantly before you get close, it might be time to call it a day. You could of course just power through with the story, ignore most of the hunts, and then do them all later on when you're quite high level. But then you're not going to benefit from the rewards of those earlier hunts, or use the hunts to get ahead of the difficulty curve by making more money and grinding more levels and license points. And I'd like to take this moment to complain about something that's been getting under my skin for a long time. Not about Final Fantasy XII exactly, but just about gaming forums in general. When covering retro games, it's safe to assume that whatever question you have to ask has been asked before somewhere. So I spend a lot of time rooting through old posts to dig up the answers I need, and you very often come up against a conversation like this. My boat is leaking, does anyone know how to fix this hole? Have you tried taking the boat out of the water? Yeah, completely unhelpful, actually, style answers like this. In FF12's case, the question is usually, Around what level should I try this hunt before having people go, actually, level isn't important. You can finish this game at level 0 if you know what you're doing. It's about your equipment and loadout, you pathetic casual. Well, first, I call bullshit on that because I have seen significant differences in my HP and damage output thanks to my level. Secondly, unless you're actively trying to avoid leveling, the equipment you'll be able to buy and the licenses you'll have to use them will in fact be reflected by your level because gil and LP is gained by fighting enemies. Thirdly, the original poster was looking for a general range of levels that are viable for a reasonable fight, not one that is going to be a monstrous slog. You already knew this when you read the question, but rather than offer up a helpful answer with a level range and loadout, you just decided to be an ass about it. Sorry, I've needed to get that out of my system for quite a while. Regardless though, there's going to be some trial and error in figuring out when you can take on certain enemies. What I'd say is, don't get wrapped up in FOMO. Don't worry about outgrowing the reward for a certain hunt, because something else will come along anyway, and you're just going to be putting yourself in frustrating situations a lot doing that. Enjoy what there is of the story, try hunts when you need a break, and see how it goes. Hunts are, in general, much more challenging than story fights, and you may even have to jump through some hoops just to get the enemy to spawn. You'll frequently be up against monsters who only appear when certain weather conditions are met. This sounds cool on paper, as it implies that these are living creatures that have places to be and things to do, and aren't just hanging around in one spot, waiting for you to come and turn them into mashed potatoes. In practice though, it just means running in and out of an area multiple times, waiting for the correct weather for the mob to pop, so you can actually battle it. It's one of those things that, again, makes sense in an MMORPG where the weather patterns stick around for a specific amount of in-game time, and you may be better off running off to do something else while waiting for it to change. But I can't imagine anyone shows up for a monster hunt in this game, doesn't get the weather they want and thinks, I should go do some more story missions and come back after a few in-game days to see if this guy spawns. Hunt mobs are the ones that want to exploit all the statuses in the game too, and they're much spongier than the majority of the story mission bosses, so their fights drag out for a long time. As such, your equipment does matter, as unhelpful people on the internet will attest to. It's just not the only thing that's going to affect how the fight goes. You need the right accessory for each character, the right gambits and strong weapons, and being within about 10 levels of the boss will help a lot too. As with all bosses, you can't detect any kind of elemental weaknesses on a hunt mark by using Libra, which is the scam power for this game. So it's a matter of either casting every elemental spell on them to see if they absorb one or take more damage from another, or checking a guide ahead of time. The same goes for statuses. You just have to cast and see which ones register as immune, and since a miss won't tell you if they have immunity, you may need multiple tries. There is an accessory called Niho Palaloa that you can find later in the game. This reverses the effect of medicine, so you can use that and throw a remedy on the target to hit them with everything, and then just see what sticks. Certainly, this is a very big and time-consuming side hustle, and I should point out that the actual rewards for completing the hunts are pretty minimal. In terms of payout, you'll make more from selling the loot you acquired by getting to the target than you will from the petitioner. However, you'll often acquire a special loot item to sell and gain something interesting in the bazaar as a result. The real reward is playing the game. You see, it was around the time I took on a hunt called Bloodwing that my attitude towards this part of the game really started to change for me. This was one of the first marks I got, where I didn't have a map for the area it spawned in. He's actually hidden deep in one of the starter dungeons. It's the place where we fought the Mimic Queen when escaping Nalbina Fortress. The entrance collapses during that escape, but we can get a key to another entrance and venture even deeper than we could before. I love this kind of stuff. Reusing starting areas and adding extra sections to them to find much later in the game, especially when you leave the hint of something there to tantalize your players with. Ooh, I bet you'll be coming back here for this later. There was actually something of a lengthy side quest just to get back into these mines that involved dancing cactus people and other weirdness. It was a bit of a jaunt just to clear this, but it was fun. Then we had to do some fetch quests for this one woman to help her create a medicine for a sick traveler. This part was kind of annoying, because while you have a rough idea where to look, you're literally trying to pick out these tiny glimmers in the sand. But once you've done all that, and become the savior of this little village, you can get back into those mines and into the high-level sections you couldn't before. You'll wind deeper and deeper into these abandoned tunnels, fighting a host of undead, and believe me, it will only get worse the deeper you go. Bloodwing himself is a pretty unremarkable mark. He's just a bigger bat with more HP, but it's what happened after that really made things interesting. You see, I was more than 3/4 of the way through this dungeon, and I suspected that there'd be an exit somewhere at the end of this route, making advancing far more tantalizing than going back the way I'd come. After all, I'd just be creating more work for myself later if I wanted to see what was down here. So I pushed on, and oh god did things get worse. The amount of enemy spawns in this section is insane. There are hundreds of skeletons and ghosts popping up out of the ground as if they're trying to keep you away from something. And that last chamber, man, that sure does say boss arena, doesn't it? When I finally punched through the legions of undead and made it to the save crystal at the end, I entered the final chamber and... oh god. An Esper. I hadn't exactly planned to go after the optional ones at this point, and I certainly didn't think I was ready for this. Fortunately though, Zalera is more of a gimmicky fight than a really tough one, so I went for it, and I bagged him, and what a thrill that was. This was a real piece of emergent storytelling. The game had led me to the moment without leading me. It hadn't needed to use objective markers or even tell me that there was something here. It just made the option of going forward slightly more tantalizing than going back. And when it started throwing hordes of enemies at me to stop me getting there, it just made me want it more. And when I got it, I wasn't even sure I wanted it. This is absolutely masterful level design. I'd written an entire personal narrative of a hunter chasing down a seemingly mundane target, helping out a village, trying to take a shortcut out of the mines, and stumbling into the lair of a fallen angel along the way, and winning over command of said creature after the battle. Amazing. 10 out of 10. More of this, please. It was at this moment I knew this wasn't just a side hustle for people interested in fighting superbosses. There was an entire other game and narrative going on here, and I'd be really missing out if I didn't go after it. There is a lot of good in monster hunting. There are entire areas such as the Nabrius Deadlands and the Necrol of Nabadis that you just wouldn't visit if you weren't tracking down all these things. If you're wondering what happened here, well, remember this? Nabudis was where the Midlight Shard was kept, and it would seem it was instrumental in its downfall. We never get told about this though. In the intro, all we hear is this.
Nabudis has fallen. Impossible!
My father? I know not.
So another thing added later, it would seem. These places enrich the lore of the world by showing us the devastating effects of Nethicite weapons as we explore an environment shrouded in mist and inhabited by easily the most shit-eating enemies in the game. Seriously, I hate these guys. It's so frustrating how they just gang up on you. This particular dungeon doesn't have a save point of any kind inside it, and it's a hell of a trek through areas filled with more of these crappy enemies just to get to a teleport point. Every time I realized I had to trek back here, even when I was far stronger than the enemies inside, I always found myself sighing and questioning if it was worth it or not. You might say this makes sense from a lore standpoint, but just like the Great Crystal, it places unnecessary demands on the player's time. I know that the autosave function in the Zodiac Age helps with saving at least, but there really needs to be a more convenient way to drop in and out of here. This area also has the Chaos Esper, who is quite the problem unto himself. There is a whole quest related to collecting 3 medallions to fight 3 sealed up terrors, one of which is...
Well, that's no ordinary rabbit.
It's a really nice bit of lore. It again shows us that this is a bigger world, where things happened before, and this conflict, while important to Ash and her crew, is just one of many. My problems with a lot of this are somewhat similar to what we've already talked about though. There's just too much here that you would never be able to figure out without a guide. That is, unless you're someone with unlimited time to just comb through every location in the game and speak to every NPC all over again once you've hit a certain milestone or initiated a certain quest. I don't need objective markers cluttering up my screen, but I need more than a vague hint of where something might be so I can actually make progress in a quest, rather than just wander around aimlessly, hoping that I'm exploring in roughly the right direction for something while being assailed by monsters left, right, and center. There are also some very shitty tactics used by some of these enemies. For example, perfect defense. Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. The mob just becomes invincible for a couple of minutes, and you can't do anything about it. This is removing player agency. It creates a situation that the player can't do anything about. You just have to stay on top of your healing until the game decides you can play it again. And that's it. It's just needlessly stretching out the fight. The worst situation for this is with the final Esper, Zodiac. Now, you might think that one of the game's super bosses would be exempt from critique, as it's meant to be an exceptional challenge. But no. You see, Zodiac's power, Darkager, can just KO an entire party, no questions asked. He uses it once after so many turns have passed, and the percentage chance of an instant KO increases each time he fires it. So add to that a few minutes of him being completely invulnerable and... yeah, that's it. You can just stand around and wait to die. Ingenious enemy design right there. Nothing says we didn't have an interesting way to make this fight more challenging than you have to wait around for 2 minutes and just hope you don't get killed by the RNG. Very fair. I can see why these are the people who made the game called Final Fantasy Tactics. Of course, you counter this with your own shit-eating tactics, by just maximizing your damage output and just rolling the dice on him until you can take him out before he can use his perfect defense power. There are also a few areas, one dungeon in particular, where enemies just infinitely respawn. This is again creating a situation that the player can't do anything about. All you can do is hold down the escape button and rush for the exit, because any attempt to engage with the enemy is just a waste of time and resources, so why would I even bother? There's also a problem with spectacle. As great as many of these monsters look, they're clearly just reskins of monsters we've already seen. Even Omega is just the Mimic Queen reskinned. I've already pointed out how limited the creature variation is in this game. Yasmat, the ultimate dragon, is literally just Hellwim, but a different colour, with more HP and different affinities. And I'm going to be honest, after smashing through a big majority of these, with only a few of the very strongest left to uncover, I was kinda ready to say, it's not really all worth it. It was beginning to feel either boring when the enemy was too tanky, or frustrating when it just employed shitty tactics. And I was more or less ready to say, you know what? That's enough. And then, this guy showed up.
Now we fight!
Oh god, it's really him! Oh god, the music! Is it? Yes! Yes it is! Let's go! I absolutely loved this fight. Really fun. Though he does use perfect defense also. A great callback to previous Final Fantasies, and definitely one of the game's high points. What wasn't anywhere near a high point was Yasmat. This fight is just terrible. Prior to even getting the mission, you'll need to fight another dragon called Helwym, who's sealed up beneath the earth. Helwym and Yasmat are basically the same. They're the same mesh and animation rig, they have basically the same attacks, but Helwym is weak to Holy, meaning you can really hurt him with weapons like Excalibur, and get those health bars down pretty quick. Yasmat though, it's weak to Dark, leaving you with just the Yagyu Darkblade to hit its weakness with. Oh yeah, super fun thing. The Ninja Sword licenses are locked behind the Mist ability licenses, and I had to completely respec my Shikari because I hadn't bought the correct Mist ability and locked myself out of the Yagyu Darkblade license. Yeah, another load of bullshit that there was no way I could have seen coming. So it's more or less the exact same fight, but it just takes a really long time. I played this mostly sped up, and it took easily over 4 hours. I honestly can't imagine why anyone would have tried to do this back on the PS2, because what a boring grind it is. It's certainly true that I didn't have the most well-equipped party, and not all my guys were around the recommended level 70 for the battle, but this is still an absurdly long and boring fight. It's mostly auto battle, but like Helwym, all of Yasmat's attacks have a 5% chance of instant KO, no questions asked. So, it'll occasionally yeet 2 of your guys in rapid succession, and lead you to actually take the wheel for a few minutes while you resurrect everyone and reset your buffs. I can't even begin to describe how tedious this was, and how unsatisfying it was to finish. By the time it was done, I had a brief moment of relief, followed by an existential crisis about just how I'd chosen to spend the best hours of my Sunday. This is probably the worst super boss I've fought in the entire series, and it blows my mind that they created an enemy where running out of the arena to save your game was considered a valid tactic for dealing with it. Anyway, I think I've communicated a good deal of my likes and grievances about this side of the game. Though if I'm being honest, if I went case by case through every moment in every hunt that really got under my skin, we'd probably be here all day. To summarize, this is where the real meat of the game is, and where you'll have your most exciting experiences and epic battles, as well as just the absolute worst that not only this game, but maybe all of Final Fantasy has to offer. Now, let's wrap up the story with the spoilers. This, probably, won't take very long at all. The villains of our piece are none other than Vayne Solidor, who we've already met, and who will become our final boss, his associate, Dr. Sid, and an unknown godlike race called the Akuria. I think most of you know the term Deus Ex Machina. The original translation of the God from the Machine refers to actors playing gods in theatre plays being winched onto the stage to basically fix the convoluted mess that the play had become with their god powers. And that is a pretty good way to describe the Akuria. Aside from vague allusions towards gods and religion, they are never mentioned before they show up, they exist to do a couple of things, and are never mentioned again after in either this game or any other set in Ivalice. Historically, the Akuria were the ones who gave the sword to King Wraithwall and guided him to a massive piece of Nethicite called the Suncrest. This was something they created with the express purpose of manipulating other races. It's sort of like the mass relays in Mass Effect. They supply this immense source of power to the people they specifically want wielding it. And once the world is hooked on their drip and dancing to their tune, people can't imagine a life without it, nor do they have the will or means to manufacture their own. Why they need to do this, rather than just using their immense power to rule directly over Ivalice, is unknown. But we know so little about them that any guess is as good as any other. From the Suncrest, Wraithwall cut the Sun Shard, the Dust Shard, and the Midlight Shard, and used their power to forge his empire. And this was, apparently, all in keeping with the Akuria's design. While the Marquis and Larsa play 5D chess with empires, they play snakes and ladders with the entire world. At some point though, an Akurian named Vinar felt that it was wrong for his kind to manipulate the races of the world below to unwittingly do their bidding, and descended to Ivalice to try to do something about it. An Arcadian scholar named Sidolphus Demon Bunanza, or Dr. Sid for short, stumbled into the ruins of Giruvegan during a harrowing expedition into the mist-covered forests surrounding it. Somehow opened the doors without the aid of Belias, and it was here that he made contact with Venar, and the renegade Acurian began instructing Sid in the production of nethicite. This information is what supercharged Arcadia's industrial revolution and transformed their world into a seemingly high-tech paradise and their skyships into a powerful science fiction-looking armada that can even fly in yachts. Sid openly talked with Venar at every opportunity, but the Acurian wouldn't show himself to anyone else. This is why when we first meet Sid, he's like this.
Thing, to be sure. Nabadis taught us much. Yes, it's well hidden. They'll be off chasing after shadows, the fools. Ah, yes. The reins of history back in the hands of man.
And as such, people have opinions about him. Obsessed with the power of nethicite and driven to create more and more powerful weapons, Sid appeared to be losing his mind. He eventually approached Vayne and explained everything about the Acuria, the nethicite, and his quest to put the reins of history back in the hands of man. Their primary motivation behind the invasion of Nabradia, and the somewhat convoluted scheme to get Dalmasca to surrender unconditionally, was all about acquiring the Dust Shard and the Midlight Shard. Manufactured nethicite is very powerful, but as Judge Geese himself says, it's a cheap imitation of the real thing. They need the real deal if they're going to make any further advancements. And Vayne sees this as his chance to become not only the next Dynast king, but one who rules not at the behest of the so-called gods, but in spite of them. Spitting in their face and directing the fate of man with his own power, not begging for the scraps the Acuria throw him from their table of plenty. It's time to take a look at our leading man and leading lady. Ash is a woman of great determination. She is driven by the grief at the loss of her father and her husband, and also a sincere desire to see her people free from the troubles of both war and tyranny. When her uncle, the Marquis, announced she had taken her own life, it cast doubt on any claim she could make of her heritage, and also made him seem like a willing puppet of Arcadia, meaning she no longer felt she could turn to him for protection. Interesting though, how she was willing to believe the lies he spread about Bash in the same breath as those he spread about herself. But we can forgive a grieving woman a misstep here and there. Despite all that, she and Vosla amassed a significant resistance against Arcadia's encroaching forces, and she became not only a figure that they rallied to, but an actual sword in the field fighting alongside them. While we do find her in distress and in need of a knight on a couple of occasions, she's anything but a damsel, and she stands defiant in the face of judges and her captors, though some of that royal entitlement does come through in her initial interactions with Varn.
Stop being so stubborn. Keep on like this and you're gonna get us all killed.
Don't interrupt.
That determination is what leads her to first try and steal Balthia's ship, to go in search of the Dawn Shard, despite it being hidden in a death-trap dungeon, and when that plan fails, she resorts to negotiation to get what she wants. She's certainly smart and good at dealing with people too. In the aftermath of the destruction of the Leviathan Dreadnought, the crew are able to recover the Dawn Shard. However, its power has been spent, and it cannot be used as proof of her royal lineage anymore. While their trip to ask the Gareth for information proves fruitless, they do meet up with Larsa again, and now the young man reveals his hand. We see a new layer to Ash here. Were she a single-minded warrior, hell-bent on her own vengeance for her father and her husband, she might never agree to this. But her country and her people are her greatest concern, and if there's a chance she can end this war and return peace and stability to them, then that's what she'll do. Fate twists the blade one more time though, when Vayne makes his own play before any of this can come about. He murders his father, blames the members of the Senate, and uses that as a cover to dissolve them and claim full authority over the government, even putting his judges to a fierce test of loyalty himself. One which Gabranth barely passes. Larsa's father may have been open to negotiation, but his brother certainly isn't. This is what leads the crew to seek the Sword of Kings, the Sword of the Dynast King is the only weapon capable of destroying Nethicite, and removing it and all the devastation it can cause from the battlefield. With the blade in hand though, they return to find the temple devastated at the hands of the Imperials, Larsa taken by Gabranth, and Judge Bergen, his whole body laced with manufactured Nethicite, and his strings now being pulled by Venar, waiting to relieve us of the Sword of Kings. After defeating him, it seems the crew need to make a direct line to the Drakelore laboratory where the Dawn Shard is being held if they're going to deal with it. It's during this very lengthy journey that both Balthier and Ash share a moment. Balthier is wondering about her intentions. Is she really interested in destroying this power, or does she have a desire to take it for herself? You see, he's seen what Nethicite can do to a man. He's watched his very own father succumb to obsession and seeming madness with it. Balthier is none other than Cid's own son. I'm really not sure if this reveal was supposed to have a significant impact on me. Certainly it does Ash, but at this point I hardly knew anything about Dr. Cid, as he'd only appeared in a couple of scenes and just seemed a little odd. He wasn't really a character to me at that point, so the fact that he is in some way connected to Balthier didn't really bother me. I mean, we've already got the connection between Gabranth and Barsh right here, so this moment just kinda made my eyes roll if I'm being honest. Balthier is the son of Arcadia's eminent scientist, a man who supercharged their scientific revolution through the production of Nethicite. He held such authority that he could elevate his own son to the level of Judge Magister within their military, and while you might think that that might make Balthier happy, it was just a chain around his neck. Like someone watching a beloved family member slowly lose themselves to dementia or drug addiction, Balthier saw his father transform from a man he loved and respected into a shadow of himself, obsessed only with Nethicite and the power he can take from it, while endlessly chattering to some invisible apparition about delusions of grandeur. He saw him produce more and more weapons to better enable Arcadia to destroy their enemies, and grew to hate the man deeply. Rather than watch him lose himself anymore, he forsook his title, his status and power, and fled for the skies to live free as a pirate. It would seem that beneath the suave and cool veneer, there's actually a lot of trauma hiding down there, which may go a long way towards explaining why a profit-hunting sky pirate would throw himself into a very obvious trap for a girl he's barely met, or to help a princess of a land he doesn't belong to. This is far more than a transaction. This is personal, and there may be some higher ideals there too. But in his own words, he's the leading man, and it's a role he clearly loves playing. So, it's when we battle Cid, along with the aid of Redis here. He's another sky pirate who basically runs an island nation of sky pirates and has his own bone to pick with Cid that we'll come to in a moment. But it's only at the end of this battle that Venar reveals himself to the entire crew, and Balthier can put the pieces together about how his father's mental state changed. For some reason though, everyone just kinda stands around and lets Cid fly off. First, he taunts Ash about her desire for the power of Nethicite, something she's clearly wrestling with on a deep level now. Even without it, the Imperial Armada is incredibly formidable, and having it on her side would be a great help. Then he flies off, saying he'll be at Giruvegan if they care to give chase, and literally, no one swings a sword, fires a gun, or casts a spell to try and stop him. So, time for another text crawl to make sure we're all on the same page. In the aftermath of the Leviathan exploding, the Marquis quit his station on Bujerba and set about gathering all of the resistance cells together into his own rebel alliance, resistance armada. Redis explains that he was hoping to take the Nethicite from Cid to give to the Marquis, and now that that plan has failed, the crew rush off to Giruvegan to battle their way into the depths of the Great Crystal, secure yet another Esper for themselves, and then it's time for Lady Ash to meet the Ecuria. Ash's vision of the Ecuria sees her set in a magnificent city above the clouds, and these seemingly divine beings speaking in beautiful poetic prose of powers most holy and covenants long past with her ancestor, the Dynast King. History remembers him as a great hero and a legend, but let's not forget that history is written by the winners. He didn't just attain the power of Nethicite and suddenly everyone fell into line to form a great empire. No, he built that thing the old-fashioned way, atop the blood and bones of any who dared oppose his advance. Whatever peace and prosperity came after, it was brought through the door at the point of a sword. The Ikuria only appear to Ash and none of the others, though they hear their voices. They see that Ash desires the power of Nethicite as a way to liberate her people and provide her with both the location of the Suncrest and a new blade with which to cut her own shards. The veneer of divinity and benevolence is ripped away the moment Venar is mentioned though. Their tone turns rotten and they speak of him as a heretic. They declare that Nethicite is their gift to give alone, that it is their place as eternal beings to steward over Ivalice and, when necessary, pass judgment on those below. It would seem their aid has a lot less to do with helping Ash and Dalmasca, and a lot more to do with re-establishing their status quo. One big problem a Chosen One has, and a subversion I feel doesn't get used enough, is who's doing the choosing. It's also interesting that at the very moment where Ash begins to doubt her resolve, when the Ikuria tell her to destroy the Empire and Venar, that's when she again sees her husband Ramus urging her to take up this blade and take on this task. When all is said and done, Dr. Cid is nowhere to be found, and it becomes clear that this was a ruse to lure Princess Ash here to receive the gifts of the Ikuria. But to what end? You might be thinking by now, clearly, Venar has a point. Clearly, the Ikuria aren't benevolent. They just want to control the fate of all the races of Ivalice to serve their own ends. So, maybe he's right? Ah, the old name a villain who's right Instagram reel. A place where people with zero media literacy flock to comment about how Thanos was right and how Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is some kind of hero. Plenty of villains have a point. Villains can be morally complex, and this often makes them more interesting. That complexity can even work to make the hero doubt their own course in fighting them. But let's make one thing very clear here. The villain is never right. That's why they are the villain. They may have reasons for doing what they do. They could even be tragic characters themselves. But the fact that their actions cause so much suffering, and that they are willing to permit that to serve their own goals, is what makes them the villain. All their talk of the ends justifying the means is just cowardice. It's a way for them to justify their actions to themselves, to cast themselves as the misunderstood hero in their own tale and not own up to their own shortcomings or their inability to resolve their problems without causing suffering to others. On top of that, it seems to me like Venar isn't so much giving the reins of destiny back to the Humes, it's just taking them from the Ikuria as a whole for itself. And given it's willing to see Nethicite detonated and thousands die while miles upon miles of Ivalice is turned into a mist-covered wasteland, I can't say I see any reason to grant any moral superiority to it just because its endgame seems to work in the Humes' favour. So having finally got our ship engine upgraded, we fly off to the Tower of Pharos. This tower is another long-ass dungeon that we have to trudge through to get to the Suncrest at the top, and it's here that Lady Ash has to finally answer the question she's been faced with all along.
Quiet life or blaze of glory?
No, not that one. Well, kinda, I guess. If she cuts her own crystals, then she is going to war, to the bidding of the Ikuria, the annihilation of the Empire, and the path of a new dynast queen. But she has another choice. Destroy the Suncrest and end the reign of Nethicite. And it's at this point that Judge Gabranth appears out of nowhere and starts spouting all this Darth Vader stuff.
Yes, good. Find your wrath. Take up your sword. Fight and serve those who died before you.
Oh, hey buddy. Haven't seen you in a minute. What you been doing since, God, how long has it even been? In truth, Gabranth has had his own battles to fight. The previous Emperor had bid him protect Lord Larsa from Vayne at any cost. It turns out that cost also meant swearing fealty to Vayne, that he might have a chance to spirit Larsa away from trouble at Mount Bur Omisase, and continue protecting the boy from his own brother and his ambitions. Vayne sent him to track down the princess to see if her intentions were really to make war on Arcadia, but I honestly can't figure out what his ploy is here. Is he hoping to provoke Ashe into taking the shards, so she's strong enough to fight Vayne maybe? Our princess, nay, our queen, finds it within herself to resist the temptation of this devastating power. She sees through the Arcuria's final deception of showing her Lord Wrestler, knowing in her heart he would never choose vengeance. Both she and Vaughn come to understand that no amount of bloodshed or hatred will bring back their lost loved ones. Their lives are better spent, lived in a way that honors their memories and makes them proud, than they are spent wrapped in bitterness and hate over the events of the past. Gabranth, for some reason, decides he's going to attack after this, but the blow is blocked by Redis, who does this anime thing of explaining his entire backstory mid-fight. Turns out, he was once Judge Zekt of Arcadia, and he was the one who was ordered to use the Midlight Shard against Nabudis. Not knowing what would happen, the results disgusted him, and led to him abandoning his position. Okay, not gonna lie, but that is a way more compelling backstory than Balthia's. Why wasn't this guy one of our main heroes all along? I overpowered Gabranth easily, on account of being overpowered from hunts, at which point Cid shows up. Okay, you know what? I understand this guy with his Arcurian partner and super tech both knowing where this place is and getting here right on time, but how the hell did Gabranth even find this place? Anyway, this is our last battle with Cid. He's also here for the Suncrest, but before he smashes it to pieces, he wants to release all its built-up mist for... well, we'll get to that. Cid even brings in his own Esper into this fight, which we can and do yoink for ourselves, and ultimately, he is defeated. He asks Finar to step aside so that he might stand before his son one last time, though there seems little love lost between them, as the power of Nethicite burns him up completely.
If you are so set on running, hadn't you best be off, fool of a pirate?
With the Suncrest unstable, it needs to finally be shattered, and Redis steps up to take the job and atone for his sins in the process. A moment that would have hit a lot harder had I had time to get to know him better, and had his past been revealed to me in a more organic way, rather than just exposited to me pre-boss fight for the second time I met him. Just when we think the threat of Nethicite is finally gone, and that Arcadia might finally back down from its plans of war with Dalmasca and Rosaria, we discover that actually, Vayne had an even more secret weapon than the one we've been chasing down all this time. This turns out to be the Bahamut Sky Fortress, a city-sized ship that was awakened by absorbing all the mist released from the Suncrest. It and the Arcadian fleet are now moving into battle with the Rosarian-assisted resistance, and Dalmasca is to be the battleground. For all the problems I have with this story, the final battle is quite spectacular, in a very New Hope Death Star run kind of way. As the mighty fleets clash with one another in the skies, Balthia and his crew rushed aboard the fortress and cut off the head of the serpent by defeating Vayne. We have one more battle with Gabranth, who survived the explosion at the tower, though he is somewhat worse for wear. And just to hammer home my point about the villain never being right here, we clearly see that Gabranth and Bash are mirror images of one another. They both lost everything, but where Gabranth let his pain turn him bitter, Bash found a greater cause to fight for, and he joined that cause so that others wouldn't have to suffer the same losses that he had. It's the same as Barret and Dyne in Final Fantasy VII. We overcome him, and then we have a final battle with Vayne, which is pretty spectacular if I'm being honest. I actually really enjoyed this final act of the story. For me, it had come at the end of a lengthy and often frustrating cycle of mopping up most of the clan hunts. I only had a few left by the time I went for the endgame, and having all this story and drama thrust back into my face was a hell of a refreshing change from just revisiting old dungeons or exploring frustrating high-level areas like the Great Crystal. Gabranth actually joins us for part of this battle, and in his final form, Vayne joins with Anar to become something else entirely. In the end though, the heroes defeat the villains, and the age of Nethicite, Venar, and the Acuria is ended. All that remains is for our heroes to escape, and somehow stop this bloody war. Fortunately, both Larsa and Lady Ashe want peace, and with Vayne dead, the young lordling is now the emperor of all Arcadia. And if that wasn't enough, they even have Judge Gabranth on their side too. Well, kinda. Hang on, if they only needed Larsa's voice and Vaughn can... you know what, forget about it. The battle comes to a halt, but the Bahamut, having lost its power source with the death of Vayne and Venar, looks set to simply crash into Rabanastre and destroy the city in its entirety. Prior to this, Balthier and Fran had rushed off the bridge of their ship the Strahl to fix the engines. Only, that's not all they did. And we suddenly realise we took off without them, and they are aboard the Bahamut, doing their best to try and jury-rig the thing back to life, so that it can be flown away from Dalmasca and crash out in the desert surrounding it. A fitting end for a real leading man, and a real leading lady. They of course insist they'll be back to pick up their ship. Eventually. We encounter Penelo a year after everything is finished, and we hear her dictating a letter to Larsa. In Arcadia, Larsa now sits as the Emperor, protected by Bash, who assumed the role of Judge Gabranth. He is honouring his brother's final wishes to keep the boy, and by extension Arcadia, safe. The Lady Ashe will soon be crowned the Queen of Dalmasca, and has become more distant from her wartime friends as time has passed. The responsibility of an entire nation weighs heavy on her, and she has suffered losses aplenty in her journey, even losing her greatest knight, as he now lives a country away. Vaughn now has his own ship and his own aspirations of being a sky pirate, and while they were taking care of the Strahl for quite some time, it was recently stolen. Though a note was left tempting Vaughn to come and meet the pirates who dare take such a thing, and the young man couldn't be more excited to be reunited with his old friends. And that's where we end our story and leave our heroes. The adventure is over, the wrongs are righted, and the future is bright for Dalmasca and Arcadia. The princess will become a queen, the lordling became an emperor, and the disgraced knight sworn protector of both of them. And our annoying little point of view character has finally grown into a young man, one who is ready to go out and take on the world for himself. And that's not a bad place to end this. Not bad at all. I am writing this section some time after I started the story analysis. At that point, a lot of it was still fragmented in my mind. The horrific grind and disappointment of fighting Yasmat had left a bitter taste in my mouth. But there is at the heart of all this a great story. A piece of classical fantasy with a bit of a science fiction spin. There's dramas aplenty and wonderful characters to meet, and the story has deep themes of grief and loss, and how those things can make or destroy us if we let them. It's all just told rather badly. As mentioned, the amount of hours between set pieces, even if you aren't doing the side content, can lead you to forgetting entire story beats, and completely ruins the pacing of what is actually quite the roller coaster when you stack everything up next to each other like I did in my editor. Dramatic moments are also handled badly. I found it hard to care that Cid was Balthier's father because I didn't know anything about him. He was barely in a couple of scenes before that and just came across as a bit odd. Redis appears for 2 scenes, has this big dramatic reveal about his part in Nabudis, and then sacrifices himself in a way that I assume is supposed to be noble and moving, but again, I didn't know the guy. We had almost no time to connect in any way. So I guess this was the wrong story for this type of game. While it might have fit very well into a more classical Final Fantasy, it just doesn't really fit into this game that's so focused on ranging all over this massive open map, fighting an endless string of battles, tracking down rare treasures, and fighting all these special enemies. The world maps of all the previous games had been a means to an end, of course, but they also worked to create the illusion of a massive world, while still keeping the pacing of all those games and their stories very tight. Sure, you can run off and blow a few hours breeding chocobos or playing cards, but you were never too far from the next big story moment, and all that's really lost in the sheer size of this world and the volume of content you have to deal with in it. So I think I do like this story and these characters. It could certainly have been a damn sight better, but I'll admit to being moved at the end when we thought we'd lost Balthier and Fran, and my heart swelling when I realised they'd survived. I know that 12 does have a direct sequel with Revenant Wings, but honestly, I'm not covering a DS game on this channel. I'd love to spend more time in Ivalice and see what's next for these characters, especially Vaughn and Penelo, since their arcs were really just beginning in this story. But I think I'm good for now. I still have a bad taste in my mouth from Yasmat if I'm being honest, and I really don't know if I'll ever replay this game as a result of that. Certainly, I'll never go after all the monster hunts again. I might do a pure story replay to try and get a more intense experience of the narrative, but that's about it. Anyway, this is easily the longest script I've ever written on a single game. So what do you say we finally wrap this one up? I have done a lot more complaining in this video than I've done in any of the others about Final Fantasy, but that doesn't mean I didn't have a good time. Believe me, there's no way I would have made it to the end of the story, let alone the 100 hours it took to defeat Yasmat, if I hadn't been having some kind of fun. Most of Final Fantasy XII's problems, though, feel like first game problems. I love the first Witcher 2, but god damn does that game have flaws. But both of these games were first times. While Final Fantasy is a long-running franchise, a single-player entry had just never gone this route before. Everything from the unlocked camera and new combat system, to the shift in focus on exploration, and a story that was on an entirely different scale to most of the others. As we saw in the development section too, there were a lot of problems there. There were lots of people with lots of ideas running in lots of directions, and when it finally came time to collect all those threads into a coherent game, well, number one, they just had way too many of them, even after chopping a bunch of them out. And number two, they just made mistakes with it. That's just how it goes in game dev. You try things, you hope they'll be fun, and even when most of it hits, you get a lot of misses too, and have to go away and do better next time. And that's what this game really needs. A next time. Another one like this. One that can learn from player feedback. That has the bigger story and deeper character interactions, maybe with a Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age style camp system. One that doesn't waste people's time with shitty MMORPG mechanics and obtuse quest design. And one with a super boss that has more going for it than just being a really long grind. Let me just restate something here. If leaving the arena, saving your game, taking a break and coming back later is a viable tactic for a boss fight, then you have made a mistake. Final Fantasy XII's legacy is clear in both 14, 15, and in the remake and rebirth of 7. These games all sport combat systems that seem like variations of ADB. In 15, for example, you hold down a button to continuously attack rather than just standing there and auto-attacking, but you still open a menu which pauses the game to issue commands just like you did in 12. Final Fantasy VII's remake and rebirth use a similar system to this, and the summons in those games work basically the same as Esper's, but without removing the rest of the party, making them a lot more useful to bring in. The game is something of a flawed masterpiece. As mentioned earlier, Minagawa-san said himself, he thought they actually put too much into the game this time, and the simple fact is, more isn't always better. So while I agree that Final Fantasy XII was just too big and bloated, this was a hell of a first time for me. I enjoyed exploring the world and delving into its secrets and mysteries, but I felt shortchanged on the story and characters, and those are the things that I love most about games in this series. So while it is certainly going to be a long time before I even think about coming back here again, I'm certainly glad that I came. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for coming. God damn, this script is long. Can't believe I now have to edit a freaking video out of it. What the hell are any of you doing here at this point? You really just sat through me talking for that long, and somehow, you still haven't had enough? Well, maybe my parents and teachers were wrong all along. If you're here, thank you so much for coming all the way to the end with me on this one. What a ride. I actually had doubts about finishing both this game and this whole video project at multiple stages in production. My heart just wasn't in it this time. Certainly, not to the degree it's been for other Final Fantasies. But somehow, here we are. Was it worth it? I mean, I hope so. But that's something only the test of time will reveal. That's it for me for 2025. The years are flying past faster and faster in my 40s. I barely get used to writing the new year on my documents, and suddenly, it changes again. Looking forward to next year, I am basically done with Final Fantasy for a long time. I am planning a supercut of the videos I've made so far, covering the first decade of 3D Final Fantasy, and I'm going to add some shorter, honorable mention segments for games like Tactics, 10-2, and Crystal Chronicles. I'm not done with RPGs, or even JRPGs for that matter. If you've been keeping watch, you'll know that there's been at least one Dragon Age stream up on the channel, and I'm hoping to cover Origins, DA2, and Inquisition early next year. Please don't be upset if I change my mind though. That's just how I am, I'm afraid. I'm also planning videos on Parasite Eve and the final form of Cyberpunk 2077, so keep an eye out for more about those in the coming months. And I guess, thank you for another year. YouTube was a bit of a roller coaster this time. I was getting so many new subscribers in the earlier months that I honestly thought I'd breach the mythical 10k barrier this year. But algorithm jiggery pokery ground that to a halt. We still did pretty well though, and hey, there's always next year. As much of a blast as playing the Shadowrun trilogy, Planescape Torment, and replaying Final Fantasy VII and 8 again were, this year I have to give a special mention to the Siberia Saga, and thank you to everyone who recommended it to me. Even the bad third entry had something beautiful to share with us. I will be checking out their Remaster 2 over the holidays, but I'm not sure if it's worth a whole video. I'll see when I get there. Oh, and I never got notified about this, but it turns out I've got my first member on the channel. So, hello and thank you to Liminal Entity 1331. I'll have to make some emojis that members can use over the holidays for you. I suppose now is a good time to remind you all that you can support me on Patreon and through memberships if you're so inclined. Thank you to all my YouTube and Discord friends. You guys know who you are. I appreciate you all for what you make and how we help each other out. And of course, thanks to all you guys. You people sitting there, watching some 40-something-year-old ramble on about 20-something-year-old games. You guys commenting with your own wonderful stories about your time with these games down below, and sharing all your great memories. I appreciate every one of you. So with the winter now fully set in, please stay warm, stay safe, and make the best of your holidays if you've got them. See you next year.